Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right, welcome back. I am fairly confident we will make up time in the second half of the day, although this topic and the next one are very important topics. And so I guess you never know where it's going to go, but we're going to do our best to keep on point. And I think we're getting to the point we're definitely to the point in the interim where we're much more focused on the conversation. We've moved through the conversation with industry and to the point where I think we don't obviously have to rehash a lot of where we're at. Mr. Co-Chairman, I think what might be easiest and best here is let's just start. Maybe we'll start with get our legislation in front of us so that we are hyper-focused on what is actually in front of us. And as we take our comments from our state officials and our utilities in our industry, it's directly focused on that legislation. Perfect.
Mr. Chairman, would your preference be just to review changes in the versions, or would you like me to go over the entire bill?
You know, I think even just you don't have to go line by line, but if you would give even the 10,000 foot viewpoint, because even in my discussions with industry as of yesterday, I think there is definitely some unknown confusion about what is in front of us.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office, working through 22 LSO 258 working draft version 0.8. On the first page, there is just the staff comments that I'll get to highlight some of those changes. Going from a broad overview as far as what the bill itself does, it provides for the creation of deregulated industrial zones. Those zones would be on state lands only, and they would be created through a process whereby the county commissioners would petition the Board of Land Commissioners for the creation of that zone. The zones would be 640 acres or more of state lands within a county, a single county. The way this is drafted, they would not be allowed to cross counties or include lands other than state lands. The zones themselves create an area whereby the regulations, the Public Service Commission's regulations on the rate of electricity would not apply. And I'll walk through where we see that in the zone. So on page 3 is where we see a couple new definitions here of the deregulated industrial power zone as well as state lands. That definition of state lands just provides that it's any land regulated by the Board of Land Commissioners or under the control of the Board of Land Commissioners. At the bottom, the new section 3719-103 is where we provide that process for the designation of land and what can be included in that land. It requires that the Board of County Commissioners hold at least one public hearing with notice given in the newspaper for at least not less than 14 days before the date of the hearing. It requires that the Public Service Commission provide the Board of Land Commissioners with an analysis of the potential impact that the deregulated zone could have on retail customers outside of the zone and non-participating retail customers within the zone, as well as any other information that the Board of Land Commissioners would want from the Public Service Commission as provided by rule of the Board of Land Commissioners. New language that wasn't there previously in this version is that subsection D on the bottom of page 4 that provides that the Board of Land Commissioners can consider the analysis of that Public Service Commission and any other factors it deems relevant in determining whether to approve a petition submitted pursuant to this section. In other words, the Board of Land Commissioners has very broad discretion as far as whether or not they will grant an approval. It does have the limitation that they cannot approve a petition that does not fall within the scope of what we've limited a deregulated industrial zone to be. In other words, if it was across 2 different counties, that sort of thing, that that they would not be able to approve that type of petition, but otherwise they can grant or approve at their discretion. In 3719-104 is where we get kind of into the meat of the bill as far as what it actually provides. The subsection A provides that the provisions of this title, referring to Title 37 with respect to Public Service Commission rate regulation, shall not apply to rates charged for the sale of electricity to a customer who meets these qualifications that we'll see below. Primarily, they have to be within, or they have to use the electricity entirely within the deregulated industrial power zone. The electricity has to be consumed for commercial or industrial use, and that it's not being purchased to replace existing electrical service capacity that existed prior to the creation of the deregulated industrial zone. The subsection B on page 6. This is another, I think, key point as far as what the bill does. It provides that except as otherwise provided in this section, the provision of this title that prohibit the sale of electricity outside a specified service territory shall not apply to sales to a customer within a deregulated industrial power zone who meets the requirements of subsection A of this section. In other words, those three things that I just listed. And this would allow for the sale of electricity out across territories to the individuals or customers within the deregulated industrial power zone. Subsection C provides some limitations that nothing within this can eliminate, alter, or otherwise change applicable requirements of federal law or any local, state, or federal tax that might be imposed. Subsection D provides that any public utility providing service under this section is not allowed to recover costs associated with that service imposing those on retail customers outside of or not participating in the exemptions provided by that zone. Subsection E provides that services provided by the public utility shall not adversely affect the service provided to other retail customers not participating in the zone. And this is in there just to try and minimize any potential damages to other people who aren't involved with the zone or interruption of their service. New to this particular version is the subsection F. And this clarifies limits on rates on transmission lines. That provides that the Public Service Commission shall regulate rates for the use of transmission lines transmitting electricity generated outside of the zone to the zone through transmission lines otherwise regulated by the Public Service Commission by setting a rate that ensures that the retail customers not receiving the benefits of the exemption are not disproportionately paying joint and common costs of transmission. And the idea with this section is, again, to make sure that those customers who are already existing or are otherwise not participating in the deregulated industrial zone aren't paying disproportionate costs or effectively subsidizing individuals who are in the deregulated industrial zone and participating in that deregulated process. Section 2 just provides some conforming amendments. The first one to Wyoming Statute 362101. This is new from the last version, and it just adds some language providing that the Board of Land Commissioners, we see on page 8, lines 9 and 10, the board shall consider petitions pursuant to the Deregulated Industrial Power Zones Act. That's just granting or clarifying that that authority is with the Board of Land Commissioners, that they can consider these petitions. That the change on lines 15, 16 is just conforming amendments applying the definitions in 37.1.101 to this chapter. The changes that we see on 37.2 in section 37.2.118, most of that that's crossed out is just kind of stylistic. It's updating the statutes that are applicable and applying it to the new statutes that are created in section 1. Section 3 provides that the act shall not apply to contracts for utility services existing prior to July 1st, 2022. Section 4 provides for rulemaking by the Board of Land Commissioners and the Public Service Commission. And then Section 5 provides that's a split effective date to allow for rulemaking immediately. And then the act itself is effective July 1st, 2022. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Committee questions for Mr. Hopkinson? Good job. Thank you. I was just going to ask, because I was looking in the room for PSC. Who do we have with PSC in there? Are they online? Commissioner Petrie? And what about Office of State Lands and Investments? Who do we have? Mr. Crowder? Okay. Well, let's go ahead and let, we'll
There we go.
do.
Sorry about that.
Both, obviously.
Chris Petrie from the Public Service Commission.
Welcome, Commissioner Petrie.
Thank you. I'm Chris Petrie, Chairman of the Wyoming Public Service Commission. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today. Got a little bug. Anyway, as you all know, the Public Service Commission, with respect to investor-owned electric utilities in the state, sets rate of return, practices rate of return regulation, meaning that we set rates in a way that allows the public utility to recover its prudent operations and maintenance expenses and commodity costs, and allows the utility an opportunity to earn a fair return on its investment. It's not intended to provide a guarantee that they earn a return, but in order to allow them the legally required fair opportunity. The other part of the rate-making story in Wyoming is that we strive to set cost-based rates, meaning that once the customers are divided into classes so that the classes contain similar customers, those rates are set. So to require a customer to pay its fair share of the costs and expenses of operating the utility and providing the services. This is done to prevent any cross subsidization between classes. Of course, we don't set the rates for the rural electric co-ops. They do that through the decisions and the judgment of their boards of directors. On the bill specifically, I think we understand the bill, and we don't have any proposals or serious questions about it. I would just point out that it does assign the Public Service Commission a couple of new tasks. The analysis of potential impact, I think we understand what would be required of us there. And then the section 3719-104D assignment to, well, what that would do is require us in rate making proceedings to consider another detail, sort of another angle on cost allocation to make certain that the deregulated industrial power zones did not produce any kind of a burden on the other utility customers. I do have one other comment on the specific language of the bill in 3719-104A3. I believe that's to be understood to mean that the electricity in the deregulated industrial zone is not replacing existing service. I'm not sure that electrical service capacity in the second line of subparagraph under Romanet 3 is the technically correct term, if that's what's intended. But I think we understand the purpose if what I've said is consistent with your intention. And with that, I'll certainly answer.
Commissioner Petrie,
Yes.
just on that last piece, what would be more appropriate language?
It may just be that the word capacity is not needed. And certainly invite the utilities who will speak to comment on that. I'm just not sure that capacity does anything.
Okay. Okay, yeah, we'll make a note to strike capacity, line 20, page 5, and for further discussion, obviously. Did you say those were your concluding remarks, Commissioner?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right,
And I'll be here for any question.
Perfect, thank you. Committee, questions for the Public Service Commission? All right. Commissioner Petrie, are you able to stick around just in
Absolutely.
case something comes up as we open the dialogue?
I will be here, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we appreciate that very much. Let's go to Mr. Crowder now, the Office of State Lands and Investments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jason Crowder, Deputy Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. Thank you again for this opportunity to speak to the bill. As the Commissioner mentioned, I think we understand the bill and appreciate it. We obviously are the fiduciary arm for the Board of Land Commissioners, and so we try to do all of the on-the-ground work and provide them with the best options when they're determining the best use or management philosophy regarding state lands. One of the things that the bill provides is that there could be a greater avenue for revenue generating streams from these lands, from the designation of these areas. And that's appreciative. We always want to encourage business use, some industrial or commercial type use on these parcels, as we derive more revenue off of those than we do off the typical grazing lease. So again, we appreciate that. We don't really know exactly how much more use we're going to experience based off of this bill. I don't think that folks who desire to utilize state lands in this way ever get past all of the input costs that are required to do that type of action or activity on state lands. I think they start adding up all the blocks that they need to pay for, and then if it becomes too egregious or just something that's not economical, they stop and they never get to us or never start seeking our permission to move forward in that action. So we look forward to seeing what new doors this may open. We've seen a few doors open in the past year for not residential, but commercial development. And we see this as maybe further opening those doors. Really, Mr. Chairman, the only comment that we had concerning the bill really was the board's authority to designate these areas separate from the Public Service Commission. But I feel like the changes that were discussed earlier may address that. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, we're happy to answer any questions and look forward to the rulemaking process with the Public Service Commission going forward.
Fantastic. And we really strive to write bills that are understandable. So now to hear from the Public Service Commission and OSLI tell us that we have made an understandable bill. We appreciate that. That's good. Yeah. Thanks. Questions for Mr. Crowder or the Office of State Lands and Investments? The only question I have is just making sure I heard you correctly, which was that with the latest changes, the authority necessary to designate, you feel like the office would have, you said may have that, but is there anything different we could do to that with the changes?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. What we want to do is dig into that to ensure there's the absolute authority. We haven't had that opportunity yet, but we'll do that for you.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you. All right, thanks, Mr. Crowder. We'll go to the Energy Authority. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glenn Morrell, Executive Director, Wyoming Energy Authority. Mr. Chairman, I will start with a quick statement saying it's actually a little inappropriate for me to speak for or against a bill, but it is within my permissions to speak with respect to how a bill may impact the mandate of my authority, and in particular, the Wyoming energy strategy. So I'll try to keep my comments limited to that. And if I stray outside of that, I apologize to the committee and also Governor Gordon. So, Mr. Chairman, the Wyoming energy strategy is many things. It is an ambition to have an all of the above net zero energy mix and to secure and sustain the energy economy overall. Excuse me. Within the energy strategy, there are several strategic opportunities that were developed, identified, and which we are pursuing as a state. One of those is electrification. Electrification, for those of you who are not aware, maybe people in the audience are not aware, electrification refers to the increasing prevalence for energy to be consumed in the form of electricity. You see it every day. The more and more Teslas you see driving around is just one indication of how that is working. That is both challenging for Wyoming. It's challenging that our resources are typically solids, liquids, or gases, and our consumers in the future will be looking for electricity. That's an issue. But it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to take a heavily industrialized electricity base in Wyoming, which is typically very low value. We generate a lot of electricity and we typically ship it elsewhere because we don't have a deep consumption base within the state. So we have to transmit that electricity elsewhere. And as in every commodity-based industry, raw resource industry, you don't get a lot of value in return in that space, whether you're exporting energy, electrons, materials, minerals, cattle, doesn't matter. The return to the state is low. So one of the opportunities we're pursuing and within that electrification strategic opportunity is the idea of value-added electricity. So what does that mean? There are several things we're already seeing. The green data centers building up around Cheyenne is a very, very good example of that, where you have localized, high quality renewable power in the region, and it's being utilized at site for an added value opportunity with data centers. Cryptocurrency mining is one thing I do not have to talk to this committee about. You do understand that opportunity as well. We're also talking about things like renewables powered direct air capture of CO2. So using renewable energy to capture CO2 out of the atmosphere directly. We're also talking about things like hydrogen that are produced through renewable energy as well. Now, all of those are opportunities that could, of course, benefit from an increased competitiveness of the electricity market within the state. Mr. Chairman, when I read the bill and I speak to the intent only, I'm not here to talk about the mechanics or the workability, the flow on impacts. I'll leave that to the more directly impacted agencies. But with respect to the intent of the bill, it is clear to the Energy Authority that it is strongly aligned with the energy strategy overall. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for the Energy Authority? Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, Director Morrell. So, for example, if Wyoming were selected as a hydrogen hub site, and if that project were to go forward, if this bill draft were adopted, would that change anything, or would it make it more feasible or less feasible, or would it not have any impact? If you could tell.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, it's a good question. With that particular example, it probably won't make a great deal of impact because of the scale of the projects that we're pursuing. This will be more impactful to the smaller projects that are going to be challenged in terms of economies of scale and access to broader markets. The hydrogen hub is a huge concept with large transmission potential around it. It's more the more localized sort of stranded resources, I think, at first blush, I think would benefit from this bill.
Committee? All right. Thank you. We very much appreciate your testimony. You're welcome. Very helpful. Well, I guess that takes us to the utilities. So the question is, I mean, how do you want to do it? Well, my question is jointly or separately? Okay. Mhm.
There we go.
All right, Bruce.
There you go. First time. My name is Bruce Acey, and I appear here before this committee, and thank you for letting me speak with you. On behalf of Montana Dakota Utilities Company. Montana Dakota is a small company in northern Wyoming, at least small with respect to what services it provides, whether electricity or gas in northern Wyoming. We are part, though, of a broader multi-jurisdictional group that provides a number of natural gas and electrical services in the state of Wyoming. I would like to appear and express concerns, if I could say it that way, with respect to the bill. I don't want to in any way demean the action and the effort that the committees have made over the course of time in preparing this bill, but I would like to express some concerns. I'm always a little surprised that the Public Service Commission doesn't register a little more of an active concern with respect to these bills, because in the history of utility regulation, we always view that as, oh, what a terrible thing. It keeps rates up or what have you, and impedes development. And I would suggest to you that that's simply not the case. There's a lot of benefit to regulation, and particularly to ensure that the public interest is satisfied and taken care of. One of the main concerns I have with the bill is the kind of the disjointed effort that we have between different governmental entities, whether it's county commissioners or the board or the Public Service Commission. Each seems to have a say with respect to how this bill is to move forward. Some entirely within their discretion. It indicates to the county commissioners, which really is little review at all, particularly when you're talking about the use of state lands. And you would always think that while we're trying to get to a higher use for state lands, it's going to generate income to all of the citizens of Wyoming. You don't want a use that's going to benefit one sector over another. And that's why, as someone who is here representing an investor-owned utility, Montana Dakota Utilities Company, I believe that this state has been well served by the regulation that we've had in the past, particularly because it does one thing that I think is very important, and that is it ensures that all customers are treated fairly and that no particular customer class is disadvantaged to the benefit of another. The Chairman Petrie pointed out accurately that they have to act in the public interest, and that's not residential customers, it's not commercial customers, it's not industrial customers. It's a broad band of customers that they have to look at. And in any rate proceeding that they have to look at the respective return on investment for any segment. It's not overall, it's the return on investment per segment of service. So they can ensure that all different segments of their service area are being treated fairly and reasonably. And I think that's a benefit, because then you have a regulatory body essentially the same, electorate that you have that, reviews what you do. They are reviewing what the utilities are doing and what they're providing. Because of that, I think we are well served by the system that we have now. And so I do have concerns with, what I believe you anticipate that this particular bill is going to do. I would note particularly some concerns, and I would reference page 6 for one. And I believe this is one that I think the chairman referenced, although I thought he said D, and I'm referencing section E, because it indicates that the service provided by a public utility under this section shall not adversely affect the service provided to other retail customers. So it defines it as a public utility, and yet it's not supposed to be regulated. It's not going to adversely affect other consumers. And yet by having any kind of a review here, impliedly you have regulation. And some entity, and I'm assuming it's the Public Service Commission, because this particular section is under the Public Service Commission area of the statute, is going to have to do that regulation. You're going to have all kinds of experts that are going to testify as to whether there's going to be an adverse effect. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that anytime there's a bypass of the system, there's going to be a negative and an adverse effect. And so you're indicating to the commission that they have that responsibility of making that determination, which is hardly a deregulated, aspect. It's, in my mind, kind of exactly what the commission does in any of their regulation. And with respect to that, they have on page 9, which is 37-2-118, section 4, you provide, or the act provides, that the regulations are going to be provided by July 1, 2022. And I believe in the last effort, and I thought the commission, in promulgating regulations from a prior bill that the legislature gave to the commission, they got on it almost immediately. It has just barely been promulgated, and it took a number of months to do that. So this is a fairly complex area. And even though the commission might already be on this and anticipating passage, and I don't know if that's true or not, but I would say, assuming that this would be done the 1st of February, the 14th of February, or whatever, they'd be hard pressed to put out and promulgate appropriate regulations by that date. So I'd point that out, that is a concern. And so, again, I don't want to demean what the committees have done. I respect and believe, as I've participated before, with respect to this initiative, that you've done very well with respect to the effort that you made with it. But I fundamentally believe that we are demeaning a certain amount of the process that we have now that is really developed since the 1830s, and in certain fundamental principles of public utility regulations have not changed over time, whether it was the railroad or the telegraph or what have you. The concepts and the principles are the same, and I think we have to respect that over time. Finally, as a last thing, I would point you to page 8, 37-2-118. And I'm just not sure how this really makes its way into this bill. Who may make a complaint? You're restricting the commission's ability to respond to complaints, and you're addressing that. So I'm not sure how that has an impact there. It just seems a little misplaced with respect to legislation. In any event, I commend those concepts to you and my thoughts and concerns with respect to this bill. And again, I'm very much appreciative of the opportunity of appearing before you in this great venue. We'll have to use it again.
Representative Sith.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Acey, thank you so much for your presentation. First, I want to see if I understand what your objections to the draft are, and then ask you if, and the follow-up question will be if any of it's fixable, or do you think if we just have to not have the bill? The first objections seem to be that it was a disjointed effort between local governmental entities, that giving too much discretion, for example, to the county commissioners. The second, my translation of it is that if you have an industrial power zone on a state land section, that it violates the principle of multiple use, because if you're using it for industrial power, you're not hunting and fishing on it or using it for recreation. You didn't say that, but that's kind of what I heard. And then third, I thought I heard you say that you thought this might discriminate against residential customers. Again, not your words, but that if you're giving a differential rate that's preferable in this zone, it might hurt other people. And then fourth, it seemed to me you were saying that this is not really deregulation. And fifth, that July 1st is just too fast for regulations. And then sixth, something about the complaint process. So first question is, did I accurately capture your objections roughly? And second follow-up is, if I did, any other objections you have? And then finally, is any of that fixable, or you just have to get rid of the whole thing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Racy.
To Representative Stiff and his questions. Representative Stiff, I think you very accurately captured what I'm trying to express to the committees today with respect to this. I do fundamentally have a concern with the concept, because as a regulated utility functioning in different jurisdictions, we see, and to give you a sense, Wyoming is about 10% of our service load. So, whether it's North Dakota or South Dakota or Montana, those states share a greater, proportion of the load that we provide service for. So we also, and I'm not going to say we have a greater interest in what maybe North Dakota does because it's a greater share of our load. That wouldn't be accurate, but it would indicate that we are very interested in what the other jurisdictions are doing, and particularly what legislation is, being sponsored and initiated in other jurisdictions. And so with that, I would have to say that this is a little unique with respect to, some of what we've looked at among the different jurisdictions. And we think, again, that if you go back to the fundamental concept of regulation, it's not all bad, particularly, and you've heard the statistics that, well, as industrial customers, we get, we have a higher level or what have you. But when we, and that is the utility industry, when we allocate our costs, we do it again across the different, service classifications, and that return of investment that has to be, it has to be equal, not equal, but it has to be fair across the board, and very little variation between the different cluster classifications. And so, Representative, to your point, I'm not going to say that I believe that this would be unfair to the residential customers. It could, but it's saved by the very provision that I pointed out. And that's the one on page 6, subsection E, because to your point, and as you accurately reflect what I indicate, when it says not adversely affect the service provided to other retail customers, to me, that gives back to the commission the opportunity, if not obligation, to make sure the one customer classification is not improperly addressed. So, the question might be asked, what's the point? And so fundamentally, yes, I am somewhat concerned with the legislation overall, but yes, do I believe that it can be corrected in respects? Yes, I do, because I think it has good points, particularly if you look at pages 5 and 6 with respect to what the commission needs to do in acting as a steward over the act. I think that's very beneficial. I do think you would need to tighten certain jurisdictional allocations down. I mean, why give the county commissioners an opportunity to review this when it's totally within their discretion. That seems to me, seems like if you're going to give them an assignment, you should have a little more, some direction to them as to what they're going to do. And I just didn't believe it did, because it, on one hand, indicated that they had a responsibility, and then you follow up with within your discretion. So you kind of to give and take away. And so I think that can be tightened up, and some of the others you can address. So while I do express a concern, I do believe it can be improved as we move forward. And so I thank you for that question. It gives me a chance to wage on longer.
Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a couple of questions, Bruce. The first, starting with the last point about the process. The concept is certainly not intended to be disjointed. The idea being that a county would make an application to the Board of Land Commissioners. So the county is the entity that applies. Board of Land Commissioners would be the entity that would apply on behalf of that county. And then the Board of Land Commissioners would effectively be the review entity, not necessarily the county. So typically in these types of processes, that's what you have, is you have an applicant, and then you have an entity that provides the review of that applicant and makes the decision. What would you suggest being an alternative as the applicant or as the review entity, if not a Board of County Commissioners and then the Board of Land Commissioners, upon advice of the PSC? What are better agents of action?
Mr. AC.
Senator Chairman, and to Senator Office. I understand what you're saying, Senator Office, with respect to your allocation, but I don't believe, and maybe I'm naive, but I do not believe that the county commissioners can just meet without any input and make an application and then submit it. I believe, at least it's my experience, that they would have to solicit input from their staffs and from the public, and they would bring that forward to prepare an application, and there would be a vote that would say, this is what we're going to do. And you have that precipitate process, if you will. And I think, even though I recognize what you're doing, I think the act should at least define a little more what's intended, so the county commissioners and those that are working on that application have a little more guidance as they bring it to the county commissioners for that initial vote to prepare the application.
Mr. Chairman, quick follow-up. I guess the question I would have is why do they need that guidance when, I mean, effectively they are a statutorily created and enabled Board of County Commissioners with obligations for public meetings, with a rather robust set of circumstances that they have to operate within? Why do we need to rewrite that for this circumstance? I mean, we heard other concerns about, well, let's lay out all of the permitting requirements that would be potentially considered in this legislation. And I guess I'd have the same concern for those types of considerations. It's already all over statute. I'm not entirely sure why we have to reiterate what the obligations of the Board of County Commissioners would be and what permits would be required or anything else, to the extent that a Board of County Commissioners would probably already know how it carries about its business if it were going to put together some type of application. So I guess I'm missing what that would look like and what directives we would apply and what requests we would make of a Board of County Commissioners that wouldn't already be, I guess, implied by the statutory obligations of that board.
Mr. AC.
And perhaps I'm a little naive, again, with respect to what goes on with respect to counties, but every time I've dealt with the Board of County Commissioners, there's always been a process that we go through to get to the result. And I believe that in working with the county commissioners, they're always benefited by the guidance they receive, whether it's the zoning regulations or the statute or whatever it is, that gives them guidance with respect to where they're going. I I guess, disagree a little bit respectfully. I think they could use a little more direction with respect to this particular act and where it's going, so that they have guidance, and not only guides them, but guides the counties. And I think you would understand that every county is going to be different and would present an application perhaps for different reasons as they move forward. And I think some uniform guidance through the act would be beneficial.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another kind of question or point of discussion on one of the two concerns on page 9, one of which to begin with was just the changes to 37 to 118, who may make the complaint. I wanted to understand your concerns. Most of what was done there was simply trying to conform the statute, but also adding coverage of the additional language that's provided here. And I didn't really understand what the concern was. There was no limitation on anything there. It was simply trying to conform the statutory language to kind of more modern practices and then incorporate what we've just done. So I think I missed your concern there. If you could reiterate.
Mr. AC.
Mr. Chairman, Senator. And you may be right, but as I look at this, it seems like it's striking out some of our present language. And the question is why? I mean, that's good language with respect to who makes a complaint and what we're addressing. I get that we're trying to strike old language and old statutes, but why are we striking out the new versions? And maybe I'm misreading what I see as strikeouts here, but that's what I'm looking at.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I guess if I can go to David, it's my understanding that we struck out effectively nothing, but we changed the way that it's the structure of the draft.
Yeah, I
Can
thought it was.
you
Mr.
provide clarity there?
Co-Chairman, Mr. Hopkinson, I thought it was a stylistic choice of arrangement in the statute.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. The striking there is all accounted for in the new language. That's just referencing the exact same statutes, just correcting it for what the statute numbers are today. So it's not changing the law at all, other than adding in, as we see the last sentence, 37-19-101 through 37-19-104. That's the new language, the new statutes created. But what is stricken out is all replaced in that previous language there as well. So
Gotcha.
there's no other changes.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. AC, if upon review, you see that we've left something out, please let us know, because there's certainly no intent on striking anything without reinserting it, which hopefully we did.
Mr. AC.
Mr. Chairman and Senator, with apologies to LSO, when I looked at that and was reviewing it, all I could see was the strikeouts and the strikeouts of the thing. And I haven't thoroughly reviewed because I thought there was an omission. I will, and if
Yeah, please.
I
let
can
us
see
know.
what's done, and I appreciate that. All I saw were the strikeouts and didn't believe that we got everything back in, but thank you.
Totally get it. My favorite question is, what are the repealers?
What
What
did
are we
we do? What
repealing?
did we do?
Yep, because you never know. So.
And Mr. Chairman, also, Mr. AC, on page 9, section 4, with regard to the dates of the rules and regulations. At the last committee meeting, we asked the PSC how much time they needed, and they said they didn't need to draft any rules. And this is what we ended up with. Board of Land Commissioners, did we ask them directly? I don't remember. But I guess what it comes down to is we hadn't heard any pushback from either of them with regard to the timeline there. If there is more time that they deem is needed, we'd be happy to do that. But we actually inserted any rules necessary so that they wouldn't be obligated to draft rules because upon first review, they didn't think they needed to change anything. So I just wanted to provide that clarification that we're very sensitive to ensuring that there be sufficient amount of time for those rules drafted if it turns out that they need any. And again, I think we're very open to
Very good.
providing necessary opportunity if it turns out that there were additional time needed. Mr. Chairman, back to Mr. Acey's point on page 6, the E Service provided by a public utility under this section shall not adversely affect the service provided to other retail customers. I kind of heard conflicted discussion and I want to understand better. Last statements I heard, I took as meaning that you felt this was a good provision to have because it gave you some comfort that the PSC would be involved in protecting the regulated utility customers. Am I understanding that correctly? Some of the earlier statements led me to believe contrary, but then I changed my mind. I just want to make sure I'm on the same page as you on that.
Mr.
Sure.
AC.
You are correct. I believe that's a beneficial provision.
Okay, excellent. And Mr. Chairman, I think that's all I have. Let me see if anybody else has anything, but
Well, I was gonna ask you, Bruce, there were two things, just kind of overarching policy, less in the weeds as my co-chairman was on some of the specifics that you were discussing that I wrote down that you said. The first was, quote, a little unique, and I want to thank you for that, for noticing how unique the legislation is, because I think that's the purpose, is to think outside the box. So appreciate you making note to that. The second, though, is I have a substantive question for you. You said it doesn't take a genius to know an exception has an impact on others receiving the service. And so my question, Mr. AC, is, do you think without an exception tariff legislation, we would have Microsoft Data Center in Wyoming County?
I absolutely do. I think the existing regulation, sponsors that and benefits it, whether it's, up in our territory in northern Wyoming, we're open.
But Mr. AC, Microsoft came in under an exception legislation, under an exception tariff process. So I don't know if maybe in the tariff processing, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but when you reference back to the 1830 system that we continue to operate under this age-old system, do you consider a tariff exception process to be part of that system, or is it the reality that in creating some of those unique circumstances, we're able to attract the unique entity that we wouldn't have otherwise had? I guess that's more of a question.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, and I believe that Microsoft came in under the existing system. It was an exception, I get that. But all of that is weighed in the balance with respect to, what's beneficial and what is going to be within the public interest. And I believe to keep the system in place is very appropriate. And that's, why I again believe that this has a provision or, that is beneficial. I think you have to have an arbiter that is weighing all the classifications.
Representative Stiff, you wanted to,
Mr.
before I
Chairman.
jumped in, go ahead.
Mr. AC, one final thing. So let's imagine that this draft were adopted and became the law of the state of Wyoming. What's the most likely bad thing to happen to Montana, Dakota's utilities as a result?
Mr. AC.
Again, Mr. Chairman, through Representative. If I can, I would like to give that more thought, and I'm sure I'm going to have more opportunity to address this. The main concern that I had as I looked at it, and it wasn't particularly as it related to Montana Dakota Utilities Company itself, but investor-owned utilities in the existing system. I just thought it was an exception that, tried to carve out a benefit for a particular customer classification to the exclusion of others. And again, there are some safeguards that are there, but my concern is with respect to the jurisdictional problems that could occur, and that would leave everybody in a quandary. And if I can, I would keep that question in mind and address it, but I can't think of a specific issue right now.
And actually, Mr. AC, what you said makes me want to understand a little more that the train of thought on because my understanding of the legislation is I don't know where it carves out a specific class of applicant, although given the context of this committee, given the context of the bill, we're talking about crypto miners, but it's not exclusive to that. In fact, I think most of us would agree that the long-term vision of this legislation is the significant impacts to Wyoming, if they were to come to fruition, don't actually necessarily have to involve crypto miners. So what is help me understand, is that what, when you're referring to the specific class, is that what you're referring to?
Mr. Chairman, it doesn't, the proposed act does not mention a particular customer classification, but there's only certain customer classifications that have the wherewithal to be able to fully benefit from this legislation.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Mr.
I wanted to follow up on that. We actually do call out specifically industrial and commercial, and I was just trying to dig through. Not where, Dave, you know where I'm at?
Mr. Hopkinson. Mr. Chairman, are you looking at 3719-104A2 on page 5, line 16 and 17?
Yes, Romanet 2, bingo. Consumes the electricity for commercial or industrial use. So to be clear, there's a little bit of a carve out. It's not residential consumers, and on that point, the challenge here is that I don't think anyone on this committee actually wants to get rid of a regulated utility structure in the state of Wyoming, because it is very beneficial for the traditional rate payer, for me, for you, and for most circumstances. And there are only some outlier situations in which the system doesn't quite work. What we hear in testimony, what we hear as concerns, is that somehow this is a complete deregulation. And I think it's hard to read this as a complete deregulation where we're effectively carving out a small parcel of land, of state land, where we're providing a deregulated zone subject to quite a few requirements ahead of time and criteria for that implementation for specific uses on new load in that space. There's too many adjectives to be deregulation. Right? It's just a different set of regulations is the reality. And it's for a certain operator size that, as you pointed out, Mr. Acey, actually does have the wherewithal to potentially not need the massive redundancy and reliability of the network. They might have specific different needs so that they don't need to be paying for some of the things that I am happy to be paying for as a consumer, which is that reliability, redundancy, and certainty that when I turn my light switch on, it's going to come on. So I guess the question is, why does this have to be an all or nothing? And that seems to be how it's treated. It's either we're a fully regulated utility and we love every aspect of regulation. We like jurisdictional monopolies. It's worked perfectly for over 100 years in all circumstances, or we're being pitted against the idea that we want to completely deregulate all of power, and therefore we're hurting the retail customers and that average rate payer. Why can't we try to thread the needle and find and recognize that maybe the one size fits all solution isn't quite right for all circumstances, and then try to carve out appropriate exceptions like the tariff that brought Microsoft to Laramie County, like the legislation back in 2019 that actually is being considered by our cryptocurrency miners, where they recognize, hey, this gives us some flexibility, and then try to identify other circumstances where we don't have to get rid of the whole system, which works 99% of the time. But we have seen that large power consumers don't come to Wyoming. They really don't, new ones. And unless there's coal, oil, or gas that they're trying to get out of the ground, they're not looking at Wyoming. And we kind of have to recognize from the state's perspective that it's in our interest to try and identify solutions that would bring them here as we want to diversify the economy. So how can we thread that needle? And if this isn't the solution, what's better than this that will work for those large consumers that want 300 megawatts of power, not just, a few kilowatts of power as I do.
Mr. AC.
Mr. Chairman. So Rumpus, I don't know if I can fully address all that you've indicated, but I would note that I have a lot more, I guess, confidence in the existing structure that we had, that it has more flexibility in it than I think you might envision that it does. It has been broad enough to allow for exceptions. And particularly, I know on behalf of at least my client, that they're willing to go out of their way to assist particularly segments of customers, if you will, or classifications to try to address unique and specific issues that they might have. So I believe that the existing structure can accommodate some of the very issues and desires that you have with respect to the economy in the state of Wyoming. I think it's served us well over the years. I think it still can, because I do believe it has built-in flexibility to address it. But again, I am concerned and try to express my concerns with respect to what I believe, some of the concerns that I have with respect to this bill, shortcomings. And I do believe that we're better served by regulation than deregulation.
Again, Mr. Chairman, I guess the concern I have is that last statement gets to the heart of it. The idea that we have to choose one or the other, that it's an either. I don't think that's the spirit of what we're looking at here. I think we're trying to recognize that there are tremendous advantages that we see in Texas to a deregulated power structure, while simultaneously seeing tremendous disadvantages in Texas to a deregulated power structure. And I think we see the contrary in Wyoming, where we have a regulated power structure, regulated power utility structure, and we see incredible advantages. But I think we have to be honest and admit there are disadvantages. I mention this frequently. Over the last decade plus, Wyoming has had the lowest economic growth of any state in this country. Adjusted for inflation, we have negative growth as a state. Nobody ever wants to be part of that problem, but we keep saying we're doing things great. I guess I'm maybe one of the few people that says we're not really doing things great. We have to start looking for solutions and alternatives and new policy and try to be honest about the fact that maybe we're not doing things perfectly if we're dead last year in, year out in economic growth for the state of Wyoming and our revenue struggles, and it's in decline. I don't know that this is the solution, but again, I would ask, rather than just saying regulation is the answer and deregulation bad, this is an area where we've been hearing from a number of stakeholders that maybe we don't have it perfect and we can improve upon it. So I know that you probably don't have a ready answer, but I'll leave it to you to think about. If not this, then what? So that we can address the interests of those folks that tell us quite to the contrary. They can't do business in Wyoming and they don't do business in Wyoming.
Mr. Chairman, if I could. just
Mr.
really
AC, please.
Again, Senator Office, I have a lot of confidence in my client and the expertise that they bring. It's to their advantage to pursue economic development. And I see all that they do through the jurisdictions that they have to pursue it. I would hope that you don't view my industry and my client as somehow trying to impede economic development, because the more kilowatts we sell, the better off we are. And so we're trying to encourage development as much as we can. But we represent a number of classes and we want to treat all of them fairly. And we want to ensure that everybody has, an equal opportunity with respect to what they're doing. And with respect to Texas, you're going to probably see bills and get, comments from your customers that are going to be a direct result of Texas. And so, as you point out, not all of the answers are down there.
Mr. Reveal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Tracy, thank you very much for your comments. I wanted to maybe add to Senator Roth's question, and I think it's not, I don't think we believe that the regulated industry has done harm to Wyoming to the Wyoming citizens looking back. In fact, it's served us well. But there's something very profound that has happened in the last 20, 30 years that changes the economic opportunity for this state, and that is the internet. And so that allows Wyoming, rather than serving the electrical needs of 500, 600,000 people, to serve the electrical needs of 330 million in the US, or frankly, people around the world. We could have cloud computing, crypto mining is one, artificial intelligence, virtual reality. The computational needs of the world are going to go up exponentially over the coming years. And the structure that we currently has does not put Wyoming in a competitive position to serve the people outside of this state, which is an economic opportunity for us. So I don't, at least my opinion, I don't want to speak for the others, but I don't think there's anything wrong with what the current structure does for the people of Wyoming, but it isn't set up in a way that will allow us to compete for the electrical needs of the 330 million people in America or the billions of people in the world. That opportunity is now presented to us because of the technological changes that have occurred in the last 20 to 30 years. And so if there is a way for us to preserve the good of the regulated utilities and preserve the rates for the people, but also allow the state of Wyoming to continue to be an energy provider, a higher value energy provider, by having the computation occur here in the state of Wyoming, instead of shipping our resources out of state to where the population resides, I'd love to hear it, and I will favor it. But I haven't heard anything better than this draft legislation to accomplish that goal.
Wouldn't you agree, Ms. Tracy?
Mr. Chairman, again, we all want economic development. And again, I have a lot of confidence in my industry and particularly my client because of what I know they're doing to try to do that. And so I hear the comments, and I'm not going to say you're wrong. I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate, that insight, and we'll certainly discuss it, and I'll take it back to my client. But I still, maintain my concerns with respect to the legislation, and I've expressed them, but you've made it very, very clear as to your concerns and what you'd like to do, and that's beneficial to me. Thank you.
Committee? All right.
Thank you
Bruce.
very much.
All right. After that, you collectively want to come up. Yeah, come up. No, seriously, it's much, yeah, come on up. It's much,
We're behind you all the way. We're behind you all the way.
Bruce, you want to come back up?
we're all about collectives. Actually, you know what? No, co-op, you get out of that picture. This isn't look,
You're getting carved out already.
you already carved yourself out. Okay. Get you wherever you want to start, whoever wants to start, that's fine with me.
Yeah, I can get going again now. I'm Mark Stiggy, Vice President of Wyoming Operations for Black Hills Energy. Thanks for giving us some time, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. With me is David Bush, Manager of Governmental Relationships. Want to talk about a couple things. You were talking about high level. I want to go real high level and just talk about some perceptions that I'm hearing, and then Dave's going to specifically jump into legislation. A couple things. The infomercial is we've been serving customers for 140 years. We're celebrating that this year, starting in 1882. We've been regulated utility, and we prudently incurred investments to meet our customers' needs. We take a look about Cheyenne Light specifically. 44,000 customers in greater Cheyenne area. And we maintain lots of transmission lines and distribution lines. We are also the largest gas utility in the state, from Cody to crisscross state, Cody to Cheyenne to from Gillette on down to the Rollins area. But we're one of the smallest electric utilities in the state. Our peak last summer was 274 megawatts. And we were really proud of that peak, but we're very small. Going to our sister utility, Black Hills Power, most of our generation is in the state of Wyoming. Why? Because that was the best place to site generation. So Black Hills Power, 74,000 customers, the greater Black Hills, lots of territory as well, combined 118,000 customers. And we're really proud of our reliability. We take a look at Storm Uri last year, lots of conversation about it. We didn't have to curtail or have any significant outages on the gas or the electric. That's something to be really proud of, and we're proud of that. When you take a look at our Wyoming-based assets, we have 207, this is generation and PPA. We have 272 megawatts for Cheyenne Light located in Wyoming, 372 for Black Hills Power, so a total of 644 megawatts of Wyoming generation. I want to talk a little bit about, here's something, although it's been rebutted a little bit here about utilities being a little sluggish and not reactive. That's not Black Hills at all. We're very proactive. Up until 2014, the standard utility rate for large customers, we call it the ICS rate, the Industrial Contract Service. Big customers, greater than 13 megawatts. The standard utility tariff rate, but they want 24/7, 365, plug and play. They don't want interruptions. They want that high reliability. Back in 2013, we're contacted by a large data center, said we want something different. We want to take on a little bit more risk. So we worked almost 2 years. And in 2014, we had the Public Service Commission approve what we call the LPCS, Large Power Contract Service. So what that is this customer has the first 13 at least megawatts, plug and play, system reliability, and everything above that, they had to build their own generation and then pay for the lines to get there. In exchange, they can get market energy. And that served them very well. So when we talk about not being proactive and wanting to grow in economic development, this customer, we don't talk about customers, but they publicly stated that they invested over $1 billion in the last 6 years. This is significant to Wyoming. We believe this was the first hybrid model in the nation. So Little Black Hills Energy came up with this hybrid. Fast forward a couple more years to 2017, we were approached by some crypto miners that said, hey, we want something a little bit different. They didn't want to pay for backup generation. They don't like the tariff rate. So we extended it even further. And in 2019, end of 19, we came up with the blockchain interruptible tariff. That has really opened the door to lots of inquiries. That's for large loads, 10 megawatts or more. This is last at least 2 years term. They pay for all the required infrastructure to get it, but they accept interruptions. But for that, they have access to market energy. And we believe that's a game changer. The regulated utility, from our standpoint, the commissioners said, you can do this as long as there's no harm to existing customers. So we assume all the financial responsibilities Black Hills does and operating risks. And the last project, and then I'll circle the wagons here, is a Corydale wind farm. 2018, 2019, we had lots of our customers have their own ESG goals now. They want more renewables. So we worked with a wind developer, got fully subscribed for a wind farm, and we started construction. And as of November 2020, the Corydale wind farm, which is just west of Cheyenne, 52 megawatts, is up and operational. Again, we believe we're very responsive to customer needs, and we want to grow like crazy. But again, we're a little bit different maybe than others, but we want to grow. We want to grow the state. If we take a look at blockchain, where we are, we had the reverse RFP last summer, had over 15 responses to that. We had over 2 gigawatts. Remember that we peaked at 274 megawatts, 2 gigawatts of requests coming in. Our internal analysis said we could handle 50 to 100 megawatts of this short-term interruptible load while meeting all the other demands of our existing customers, the growth projections, 15% reserve margins, all those things. So where we are now, we're in the final phases of working with a customer. We hope in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be able to make a big announcement of this customer, but I can't say any more at this time. But we're excited about it and excited to be bringing that to Cheyenne. So really looking at it, we've been progressive, proactive. We're focused on development, and that's really our story. Second thing I want to talk a little bit about is there's a perception that all the generation that leaves the state is going into a spot market or something. So if you take a look at Black Hills specifically, we have 644 megawatts of generation in the state, that and PPAs. Of that, 372 megawatts goes out to South Dakota. That's 58%. On the surface, you'd say 58% of your energy is going somewhere else, going to spot market. It's not. It's going to South Dakota customers who paid for this generation in Wyoming and are using that generation. So I think that's an important part. Last point I want to make, really as a highly regulated utility, we think the model's worked out really well for us. We've been given the leeway. We've been able to respond to customers' needs, and we've been able to grow our utilities significantly over the years. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about market energy prices. Heard lots of talk about 3-cent power, 2 and 3 cent power everywhere. Every utility looks at procuring every single hour of the day. They look at market energy, what it's doing, and they'll make decisions as the load ramps up, load ramps down, whether they go to the market and buy, or they start up their own generation, or any numbers of scenarios. In the case for Black Hills, this conversation has been going on forever, but back in 2018, when we had that first miner coming in talking to us, power prices in the West were low forever. And I'm going to talk about some of those prices. And if you look at in the West, in the WEC region, what we look to is a couple liquid trading hubs. In the Northwest, it's Mid-C, and then it's Palo Verde in Arizona, and that sets the market price. And that's the first starting conversation that we have with 60 counterparts that we deal with almost on a daily basis, our power marketing group. So what does that information show us? It's hard to get transparency for pricing. You hear lots of numbers, but if you look at the US, the Energy Information Agency, there's a site you can auger down. I can give you that. And that shows you the detail all the way up to current, the first 9 days of 2022, tells you what those market prices are. So just some high levels I wanted to share. In 2019, Palo Verde, all in average for the entire year, 3.2 cents. That works out really, that's a great story to tell. The fluctuation for that year went from 0.6 cents, so almost a half a cent, to 13.8 cents is the high. Fast forward 1 year to 2020, that average for the year was 4.8 cents. The market fluctuation went from a low of 1 cent to $1.64 a kilowatt hour. Last year, due to a lot of different reasons, the average price was 6.1 cents. So again, in 3 years, we've gone from 3.2 to 6.1. The average fluctuation went from 1.8 cents to $1.42 a kilowatt hour in June. And then this year alone, the first 9 days on Palo Verde, the average price, market price was 4.6 cents. Again, I just want to have some clarification so that when we take a look at our marketing team and what they tell us it's 50 to 65 to 6 cents kilowatt hour, at least in the short term. We all hope it's going to go down, but that's what the trend has been. And on top of that, you have transmission costs as well, a little bit of transmission. So I wanted to clear up that data point and add some more into it. One of the last things I want to talk about is just speed to market and timing. I think we've touched upon that already. When you take a look at these deregulated zones, you're going to have to work with the state. And I'm not judging, but you're going to have to work with the state lands department. You're going to have to get a lease. You're going to have to figure out the easements, the dirt work. You're going to have to decide the customer is, do they go to the regulated utility that has that in their service territory and seek a solution, or are they going to go to the transmission provider that's close and try to work that out? They're going to have to conduct transmission studies. They're going to have to pay for those. We have one transmission study in progress right now that's about 10 months old, and we're still waiting to hear back. That takes time. It's about $50,000 for a transmission study. So it just adds to that time. We have to do system impact studies. Once you get all that cleared and understand that there's transmission access, and you can get it, then you have to go back to site development, work with your marketer, figure out what the pricing is, and that takes a while to do, along with the transmission routing you're going to have. And then you start with the site selection itself and doing the roads and all of that. So again, it's a very complicated process. I applaud, I guess, the simplicity of the legislation, but there's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes to do 24/7. And then just lastly, I had is the infrastructure costs themselves. It's been brought up before, stating the Captain Obvious, we're making 30 to 50-year investments. And the market right now sometimes is 2 years or 3-year commitment. So who's going to pay for that? So with that, I threw out lots of facts and figures, and I can flip you to the website if you like for the pricing, but that concludes my comments. David, would you like to say something about the?
Oh, I'll use this one. Actually, real quick, David, because I just want to follow up with a question,
Yeah.
Mark, because the last statement, did you call it speed to market? What did you,
Pardon me?
you call it speed to market? What did you
Yes.
say? Yeah.
Yeah, just.
So I like that concept. And I think what you just outlined, all the process that has to go into place. And then you add the extra layers of going through state lands and all of that. To me, I guess maybe that is, in a lot of respects, in this legislation, it is the governor on the flow, and separating the serious contenders, applicants, if you will, from the non-serious ones, right? Don't contact us unless you're really serious, and they're not going to, because it's a tremendous, so it really highlights, your example to me highlights why this is not a binary choice between deregulation and regulation, that there is this in between, because in the deregulated world, there is no governor. Anyone who thinks that they may have the ability to seek out the power and start whatever it is, a crypto mining outfit or something else, can just jump right in. But as you point out, even the tariff is a governor on the system, in that it is an added process to go through. You're a more serious applicant, I think, when you go through that. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that, because I know that's obviously something that as a company you're constantly processing when you're getting these requests, is, how serious of an individual or a company is this? How serious are they to Wyoming, the 50-year commitment, right? So going through a much more substantial process, does that have an increased likelihood to make them a longer term, even without that in writing?
Mr. Chairman, just high level, the vetting process itself really, separates the wheat from the chaff. The credit quality of these customers has to be pretty top shelf. And we received a number of them didn't make the grade, so to speak. There's a big difference, as you know, Mr. Chairman, between data center, bricks and mortar, hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, and the miners. Not that it's good or bad or indifferent, it's just different. And the ability to get up and relocate, just like they left China, the group left China, can be done quickly, and it can be done quickly in Wyoming as well. So a little more rigor would be good. We would like the opportunity, because we want to keep on growing, that if there's a state section in our service territory, and I think Mr. Taylor is going to talk about it, that we would like the opportunity to have the first right to serve that. We, in some ways, the opportunity to have state lands open for development now, when that hasn't been the case, is a little intriguing. But there's so much that's involved with that. And when we're talking tariffs on transmission and things, and you've got FERC and NERC and WEC and balancing authorities, all these things in a row, it's just not simple. And again, I'm not an expert on it, but I know enough that there's no easy button for it. I'm just trying to manage expectations that, we're open to anything. We want to grow, and we've been proving we're growing. And so we'd look at anything, but it's just there's no easy button with this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a couple of things jump out at me that were in both that last statement and the previous. One was a discussion of the RFP process, the reverse RFP, and the concept that around 200 megawatts it sounds like would be provided potentially if I got that number right. Did I get that number correctly?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, 50 to 100.
50
To
to
100,
100.
right, 50 to
All right, so I heard the 200 somehow, and
I'm
that actually
sorry.
sounded higher than I heard before. So 50
to
to 100 T0. All right. And that's against 2 gigawatts of demand.
Yes.
And I mean, that's presented as the cup is 1/20th full versus my view of 19/20th empty. And that's part of the concern is the rest of the discussion that you laid out was, well, we work on 30 to 50-year timelines. We build up these assets. We ensure redundancy. We ensure transmission. We ensure quality of service, because it's literally what you're obligated to do based on the regulatory structure. So the outcome is that other 1.9 gigawatts can't operate in your area. They can't under Wyoming statute. I mean, to be clear, it's not just that, well, you said no and they'll go down the street. They have to go down the interstate to a different provider's territory and ask again. And then if that provider says no, they've only got a few more providers, because the nature of this system is that your no is a whole heck of a lot more than most market no's. And I quoted you as saying they didn't make the grade, that your assessment of their credit worthiness determines whether or not they can consume power in a substantial portion of Wyoming for a project that we would like them to succeed at, but you, as what is effectively a designated monopoly for the territory, have said, no, we're not going to build out to you. That's really the root, I think, of the reason why we have concerns over the current structure for these larger projects. You'll never say no to me buying my power at home. So that's going to work out, right? This regulated utility structure works just fine for me getting my power and ensuring my lights flip on. I don't think you're even allowed to say no, if I'm not mistaken, right? But for these larger projects, you delineate. You have created an alternative system where you effectively look at their credit worthiness, all of these other parameters about them, and you make a determination as if that's a market where you get to make those decisions, but they don't get the other side of the market, which is that they get to go down the street and ask someone else. The intent here is to provide that opportunity effectively in a very limited sense and for certain circumstances. But ironically, it's literally the set of circumstances you just called out where you were willing to say, no, we don't want to go for this group. It seems to me that Wyoming, if we're going to be open for business, someone else has to at least be able to step up and say, they may not, but we do things differently. We have a different business model, and we'd like to work with you. And the idea that we have statute that says, no, you can't do that is troubling. And so I think that kind of exemplifies the concerns that we're seeing here, where we have a small number of success stories, and then everybody else, we've honestly, as a state, kind of said, head down the road. We don't have the power for you. And the other side of it really is your business model is an effective business model, and you implement it correctly and well for the people that you have statutorily been designated to serve. But again, getting back to the idea that then works for everybody, you started your discussion with the idea that you look for ways to be creative within the system. This is a new tool. This is new creativity. And I appreciate the fact that you pointed out you'd love the opportunity to be looking at one of these state parcels. To me, this would give you that opportunity, certainly, because if particularly if it's in your area, I can't imagine that if you were willing to engage to the best of your capacity, that anyone else could beat you in your own territory. And it seems to me this would give you price flexibility that you don't have under the existing regulated structure, because right now you effectively have to take into consideration all of the transmission costs and a lot of the other factors, where in this circumstance, you wouldn't necessarily have to do that. You'd have to figure out how to get it there and pay an appropriate tariff along the way. Or you could literally set up across the street, run lines, those might be expensive lines, or bill them to do the same thing and end up being able to provide at those very low rates that you mentioned early on, which were effectively the wholesale rate, or cut a deal because maybe you have excess capacity. So my question is, how is this not another tool for you? How is this not another arrow in your quiver that would allow you to have those types of creative solutions that you value and demonstrate as being effective practices in the past?
And Mark, just real quick, to add a little bit onto that question. So perfectly put, how is this not another tool? Because the success examples that you highlighted are made by tools that are an exception to the system. The success story that is developing in Eastern Lamar County it's an exception to the rule because the co-ops are an exception. You're not under the regulated system. You were exempted out. And so then any success story with the tariff is also using a tool that isn't under the existing system. And so it's not that those are bad tools. Those are great tools and great success stories. I think the question is exactly that. Here is one more tool to add to that exception list. And go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, great questions. I'll back up the bus just a little bit. When we did the reverse RFP, the qualifications were 50 to 100 megawatts. And so when you get a request, one of the requests alone was 1 gigawatt. So you look at just the credit and you start doing the easy math. I'm a recovering CPA, but you do the easy math on a gigawatt, 24/7 for 45 days exposure. You're going to require a down payment of, I haven't done the math, $25 million, $30 million they're going to have just to start playing. That's not what we're designed for. This isn't our market. That's not our niche right now. But we're willing to look at anything. So if I back up a little bit more, we're always look for anything as an opportunity. We just do. It's how we think and how we act. But we have limitations as well. We have some big customers that we're continually growing. We want to make sure that we meet their needs. And this is intermittent, short-term duration load. And that's where, do you want to have a big commitment and commit a lot of your long-term resources for a short-term load? It's something our group does on the transmission side. I'm going to let David probably get me out of the ditch here, but Dave? Is it possible, Dave?
Well, I will try. Mr. Chairman, again, David Bush, Black Hills Energy. I think some of your comments there, Co-Chairman Rothfuss, there's competition that happens already within communities for businesses within a state. And to your point of, if there is a large customer that comes to our service territory and says, we want to do business here, and we say, gosh, we don't have the generation capacity, transmission, we don't have the appetite, whatever the case may be, they could very easily go down the interstate west, down I-80 to Laramie and talk to our friends at Rocky Mountain Power. They could go north towards Wheatland or wherever and talk to our friends from the co-ops and see if they're ready to play. They can already do that under the existing system. So the choice is there. And especially as we've heard with the co-ops, some of them may have some capacity that's being freed up because of the changes in our economy and mine closures and whatever else. So there may be opportunities there for them. It may not be in Cheyenne, where we'd love to have it happen. And we've been happy with the large data centers that have committed to Cheyenne. And so within the system, we have been able to affect that and bring those folks here. I think another piece of this that we need to consider is there's already the ability to self-generate in the state. A lot of oil and gas operations do it when they're way out in the middle of nowhere. You can already do that. You can have somebody build your generation for your business and have it run and go forth and prosper. The trick is you can't be selling that power if you have any excess power. If you need 100 megawatts, you can't build 200 megawatts worth of generation and sell the other 100 megawatts onto the market. Then you become a utility, because then you're selling power. So that's where, again, there's some restrictions that I think do work well and do protect customers and keep things moving. there, I don't know if I'm digging you out or jumping in the ditch with you here,
No,
Mark, but
I'm feeling better about the whole process.
I think there's economic development, growing the state has been an issue for 100 years. We always try to find more ways to bring people here, to keep young people here. Every one of you has probably run and talked about doing something to keep our youth in the state. There's all kinds of reasons, I think, why some of the economic development isn't happening here. I love this state, but not everybody loves winter 8 months out of the year and the wind. The wind developers love it. We've seen that, which has been great for us. We're developing a lot of wind power. We're not, sorry, not Black Hills. We're not developing a lot of wind power, but others are. So, you know, we already have a lot of opportunity here. It's just finding the right balance and the right fit for our state. There are other states, Texas is one of them, that has seen a lot of growth and seen a lot of companies moving there. I don't know. I've got a lot of family that lived in Texas. They love Texas. They love the weather. They love the tax system there. They love all the things there. I don't know why we're not Texas. I don't know if this bill gets us to being more competitive with Texas. It might, but I don't know that. So I think there is a lot of things that we can already do without the legislation. If the legislation is to pass, as Mark said, maybe there is some great opportunities for us. I think it does provide state lands with an opportunity to maximize some of their benefits. I mean, there's restrictions there and in place on some of those lands already, but if there's a way to open those up to more development and we can serve that load, you bet, we're all in. But it has to be, I think, in a way that we can plan for it and appropriately do it. And making sure that we're keeping our company whole, as we do have a duty to the people that we provide, not just electricity to in Cheyenne, but also, as Mark said, natural gas throughout a lot of the state. We have to make prudent decisions. So when it comes to perhaps saying no to a very large load, yeah, we don't say no to somebody that buys a new house and wants to connect. That's not going to break us. If you're talking several hundred megawatts of needed power, that's something I think as a utility our size, we do need to scrutinize and make sure that we're making a good decision on it. So I may have rambled a little bit there,
No,
Mr.
right,
Chairman. but-
actually right there, Dave. That's spot on. So under this bill, if there was a deregulated zone and an applicant for a high load in your territory, do you believe you can still say no? It's not a residential, it's an industrial or commercial project. Can you still say no?
Mr. Chairman, you're saying if the bill passed,
Under this bill, yeah. I think the answer is yes, you can, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
well,
Mr.
that
Revere.
opened up Pandora's box.
You were closing it perfect till then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a hypothetical question. If a large, just Google comes to you and says, we would like a large project, multiples of the one success story you have in Cheyenne, but they want market energy. And you have the capacity. Does this legislation help you or hurt you in winning that mandate over someone in another state?
Dave.
You want to pull a fire alarm?
I have a colleague that wants to answer.
Well, it's just my turn to be in the ditch. So in that, I'm going to start with that hypothetical and then
And
probably.
I'll back you up. You need to start by introducing yourself for the record.
Yeah, my apologies. My name is Richard Garlish. I'm the Vice President of General Counsel and Government Affairs for Rocky Mountain Power. Appreciate the chance to be here and talk with you guys today. So Chairman Olson and Mr. Reville, in that hypothetical, you made a very important distinction in the hypothetical, if you have capacity and it's available. it's a very different situation when there is capacity on the system, whether you're talking about transmission capacity, distribution capacity, and generation capacity that is close geographically or electrically and operationally to a place. That is probably the place under the current regulatory scheme where utilities have the most flexibility, even under the current, whether you have a special tariff or just under the existing tariff, because it allows you the opportunity to kind of negotiate a special contract depending on your state and what's allowed, and potentially work with a Google or a Meta or an Amazon. And while we're on that kind of hypothetical of those types of people, Wyoming is not unique in the sense of it's not just that I-80 example, right? It's not just going from Black Hills to Rocky Mountain Power. In the Western Interconnection, excluding Texas, because Texas is different, it's an ERCOT, it's not connected to the Western Interconnection. In the rest of the Western Interconnection, if you're not a co-op, you're an investor-owned utility. So that's most of the power that's generated and transmitted is by investor-owned utilities and maybe some large publics like BPA. And all of those operate generally under the mandate of cost-based rates. So my rates are based on what it costs me to build the facilities to be able to deliver. And I think that's reflective in Mark's pricing summary that he gave us. And that's another construct. And then the idea of somebody coming in to a deregulated zone and being able to set up shop, and I think it was Mark that touched on this. It's kind of hard to shut up. There's steps to setting up shop, depending on your size, how you interface with a slew of federal regulations if you're going to sell energy and capacity and wholesale to other people. So, I think coming back around to a question that Senator Rothfuss has asked several times, is it deregulation or not regulation or deregulation? I think that's a false choice. It's not deregulation or regulation. I think it's a choice more of, in the scheme of regulation we have, where are we being innovative and can we be more innovative? There are the examples out there, not enough of them, I would agree. But I do think we're starting to see a change just overall in the electric industry. It used to be that you lived in your bubble. So if you were Rocky Mountain Power, you were in your bubble. So I would look at how many people am I serving in Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah. And I would take a guess at how many people that would going to be. And there'd be a certain number, there'd be residential customers that were going to come on, a certain number of commercial customers like Targets or whatever. And then there'd be a certain number of, large industrials, mines, or what have you, heavy industry. And you would make your best guess on that. And you go to your commission and say, this is what I think my load is going to be. These are facilities I need to build it. And I'll make the investment as long as I can get my authorized rate of return and move on to that. I think, and just speaking from my perspective, our company operating in 6 states, that paradigm is changing considerably as larger corporations come in with the Googles and the Revere and all those are coming in looking for, different types of energy service and different types of service, and kind of running up against the challenges of regulated utility models and the pricing that's available and trying to de-risk their portfolios. They're pushing us to try to be innovative. So we in turn are pushing our regulators to try to be innovative around, what can we do as a regulated utility underneath the statutes and the rules promulgated by the Oregon Commission or the Wyoming Commission or whoever, about how can we be more flexible in either how we structure the pricing or structure the credit or structure the amortization over a long period of time, to find the right balance where, because we have this in common, regulated utilities need growth, right? The more growth that I have, the more customers I have, the more kilowatts and megawatts I can produce and need to transmit, the more facilities I need to build. I invest and then get that money back through ratepayers. But part of that bargain is making sure that the ratepayers are all paying their fair share. So whether that's just the residential, the commercial, this is the customer class thing we've talked about a lot. Whether you're residential, commercial, or industrial, that there's equality between that in trying to be creative. And I think it's important to note, it's not just class warfare, if you will, between customers does not just occur between retail customers, commercial customers, industrial customers. Industrial customers don't always agree on investments that are done in a particular area, because it might depend, what's good for, just hypothetically, what's good for a data center may not be at all what's good for some kind of heavy industry processing plant that has different reliability needs or different timing needs or those kinds of things. So, I think it's a question of, if we're trying to find the right tool and the right vehicle to meet our shared goal of promoting growth, because I do think we share that is there something, have we fully looked at what we can do within the context of the existing regulations and tariffs, or are there incentives for utilities or some kind of flexibility that's in there that would achieve the same goal? My concern with this, if we're looking at the lens of our shared interest in growing the electric base, is that I'm not sure that I'm having a hard time seeing how a deregulated zone, somebody would be able to come in there and set up shop and have prices that are less than 5 cents a kilowatt hour in a timely manner, that speed to market. Sitting there thinking to myself, if I wanted to do batteries and storage, if I wanted to do any of those things, and I wanted to set it up across the street from the actual load, I'm going to have to go through this process. I'm not sure what the PSC, what's in that report to the PSC, how that gets figured into by the Lands Commission, but I have to go through all that process. Then I'm going to have to do all the site permitting, industrial permitting. That's going to add to my costs. If I'm doing if it's a natural gas plant, I'm going to need an air permit. Those are hard to get these days. And so the speed and the reliability in which that comes. I'm not saying that we have all the right tools we need today in the regulated world. And I'm not saying this couldn't be a tool, but I'm not sure that it's the tool that advances our common interest of trying to grow better. So I'll join my colleagues in the ditch now.
Well, Rich, I think your last statement, goes all the way back to the beginning of Representative Stitt's question to Mr. AC. What is the harm to Montana? And excuse me if I butcher the name, Lighten. I'm not familiar with your company, Lighten Fuel. But if what you say, your hypothesis is true, that if we were to enact this bill, governor puts his ink on it, it goes into law, and no one can get energy in a deregulated zone for less than 5 cents a kilowatt, then nobody probably builds, and then nothing happens, except Senator Rothfuss and the committee looks like we just wasted a bunch of time and nothing happened, right? So help me understand because I've actually heard that from all the companies. You're all saying the same thing. You're not sure it works. Understand that we're not convinced it does necessarily either. Our hope is that it does create something. I think the more important question is not that, because if it doesn't work, it appears there's no harm other than the time we spent. What is the harm to Rocky Mountain Power if this bill passes?
Yeah, and I'll take my shot at trying to answer this question. I think, when we're talking about harm, it's just not, that is also just like regulated, deregulated. That's not binary either. So from our perspective and our fundamental business, we have certificated service territories. We have the regulatory compact, where by statute and law for a very long time, we have the ability to provide, the obligation to provide safe and reliable service at reasonable rates to customers, and to plan for that and build and make those investments and get those returns. So if we are suddenly now trying to compete for customers that were part of the bargain, if you will, or the deal I made way back when, I'm harmed because now I'm competing for customers that were mine, or whether they're existing customers or new customers. Because right now the presumption is if you come into my service territory, because of the regulatory structure and the regulated utility into my certificated service territory, you're my customer and I get to serve you. And that was the deal that was made in the basic structure. So I'm harmed with that, but we're also both harmed because we're not building something for customers new and growing our load, growing our growth, and doing a part to contribute to the economic development. I'm not an economic development expert. I would agree though with the observation that there's a lot of factors that go into choosing a spot. Just for perspective, like I mentioned before, Pacificor, Rocky Mountain Power is a division of Pacificor. Pacificor operates in 6 states. And, these issues are coming up in rural Oregon, they're coming up in Washington, where, whether it's not so much crypto mining to my knowledge, but a lot of technology, they are looking at IOUs, they're looking at large utilities like Umatilla Cooperative or Snohomish, Grant PUD, and they are looking for the best price and competing against that. So, this is a big issue behind Wyoming too. So that's back to my point is like, I think that, regulation and regulatory utilities are not tech companies. We don't, we steer slow, we're big boats. But I do think that there's opportunities to try to find a balance that protects against that harm and advances that common interest.
So, and real quick, Representative, before I go to you. So, Rich, if I understand, summarizing you correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there isn't a harm if nothing occurs, but your harm is you very specifically said, the harm occurs when someone comes into my service territory and I can't give them the rate that they want, but another company can. So they build with the other company. So the harm is that you lost a customer because you couldn't give them the rate that another company could.
Swap out.
It's,
Yeah.
they're so finicky.
It'll come back on probably too. I don't know what's going on.
In Wyoming, in the current situation here with respect to this bill, the harm that RMP faces is that the customer, if this bill were to go through, the challenge I would have is the customers that are essentially mined by statute that I have an obligation to serve and to serve at a just and reasonable rate, a cost-based rate. Now I would have to compete in this zone for customers that were already part of the original deal. So that's the RMP thing. I'm sorry if I kind of obfuscated or dirtied it up when I was talking about the other states. All I was trying to say there is, this is a challenge that's being faced in other places, and there are lots of factors that go into these companies choosing to be one place over another. So I think very specifically, the harm if this goes through is that I'm losing the presumptions of the customers I would have, the new customers I would have.
Mr. Chairman, and Richard, thank you so much for that explanation. Is it the case that if a single, let's just use data centers as an example, if a single data center comes in and there's a specific finding that it doesn't replace existing capacity and doesn't burden other ratepayers, that may not damage you, but if this were really popular, and let's imagine on every state section throughout Southwest Wyoming, you had a new large user that was using a provider who's not Rocky Mountain Power, let's imagine there are lots of them, say 30 of them. In the absence of this bill, 4 or 5 of them might have come anyway. And so then you've lost those customers because is that part of your argument that on an individual project by project basis, it might not harm you, but in the aggregate, this bill could harm you if it were really successful? Or am I making up an argument you didn't make?
Rich.
Back to you.
It really wants Dave to answer the question.
It really, I think the universe is telling me, let Dave answer. So I like it so much, I'm going to adopt it. I think it's both things, but let's talk about it if it's really, really successful. If it's really, really successful, there could be an adverse impact on cost because now you have an issue of replication of infrastructure everywhere. So instead of having one 230 kV line that would be able to move power efficiently between one point and another, now you've got people running around putting duplicates in and adding more cost and making it hard to be more competitive, which was going full circle all the way back to kind of where how we kind of got to regulated utilities in the first place, is to have the efficient amount of infrastructure that serves customers at safe and reliable rates.
Mr. Reveal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that response, Rich. And I can appreciate that if you've historically had monopoly pricing power in a market, that losing that pricing power is a negative. I can't imagine you would answer it any other way. The question that I wanted to hear the answer to, though, is does it help you? Is it helpful to you when you're competing against that company going somewhere else, going outside of Wyoming potentially? Does this legislation allow you, again, if a large provider is asking for market energy and you have the capacity, is this helpful to you to win? And I appreciate it's hurtful as it relates to someone coming into your territory, but do you have an added potential benefit to win that deal as a result of this legislation that didn't previously exist because of your regulated pricing scheme?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because again, like, I'm not a real monopoly. I'm not US Steel. I don't get to, pick the price and set the price where my cost of production is and then mark it up, however many percent, they're between the Public Service Commission and FERC. I am going to have pricing that's based on my cost of production, period. So, that's not help to me. When you talk about wholesale power, you keep talking about market power. Can I ask you a question? Are you talking about wholesale capacity and energy? Is that what you're talking about?
Let me, if I might ask the question back to you, or in the project that was described earlier, that the company's not been named, market pricing, from my understanding, was the key to that. And from my conversations with some of these large companies, market pricing is the key to them. It's not a 3 cents versus 4 cents. That matters for the crypto miners.
Yeah.
It's not a 3 cents versus a 4 cents. It's market pricing. They don't want a massive risk to their earnings per share being held in the hand of one regulator who could walk in tomorrow and say, you know what, it's 8 cents. They just don't,
Yeah.
they won't do that. And they want to migrate away from that. So what they want is market pricing. So does this help you, assuming you have the capacity, deliver market pricing more competitively than if you didn't have this? Okay.
No, but I think, if I might, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that,
Thank you.
I think we're talking about two different markets. If we're talking about, I'm sorry, Representative Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, just if you would indulge me, just could you define market rates so we can make sure we're all on the same, using the same working definition?
Yeah, that's where I was going to try to go. And if you guys, shout me down if you don't agree. So I think we're kind of conflating two different markets. So if I am a Bitcoin miner and I am in the market to site a project of a certain size in a certain area, I'm going to be looking at the market for commercial industrial rates, traditionally rates that are set by the Public Service Commission. That's the 3 to 4 kilo, the 3 cents, 4 cents kilowatt hour. And that's the comparison between Rocky Mountain Power, Blackfoot, or not Blackfoot, I'm sorry, Black Hills, all the way down. That's one market. And then wholesale energy. So, if I am buying and selling electric capacity in the wholesale market, this is, power producers, big power producers, buying and selling to each other. Mark made reference to this earlier. So the way this typically works is that, you have a set of resources that you use to serve your customers. So you have your coal plants, you have your wind, your solar, your nuke, whatever it is, you have that portfolio and you're looking at, how do I serve my customers in the best way? And I will decide in that portfolio if I'm going to run my own machines, or can I look out on a wholesale power market and say, I can buy that from Representative Western at, X utility, pay for transmission, so a road to get it back to my load cheaper than I can serve it with my own load. That is wholesale purchase and sale of electric capacity. So you're buying generation, you're buying transmission, and you're moving it from, point A to point B to somebody who's then going to sell it to an end user. So that's a very different marketplace than just trying to find the best place to put my data center. So when you were talking about, and then just based on my experience, the larger, more sophisticated data companies, they are interested in the wholesale. What you're saying makes sense to me. If I'm able to, buy and participate in the wholesale market, which our rates are basically set by FERC, generally speaking, that de-risks me considerably in some ways, but I think they're two separate. So does this bill help me as a regulated utility do either one of those things? No.
Sean?
Hi, Sean.
Hi, I'm always bad at cleanup these things. I'll do my best to keep it short. My name is Sean Taylor, Executive Director of the Wyoming Rural Electric Association. You all know this, but I bears repeating. We represent 14 distribution cooperatives all across Wyoming that provide power to the small rural communities, ranchers, and farmers. And then we also represent 3 generation and transmission cooperatives, which are the larger utilities that own the power plants, the wind farms, the high voltage transmission lines that get the power to our distribution systems. And I want to clarify one thing real quick. We consider ourselves self-regulated. Whenever we have to look at a rate adjustment, we do the same due diligence that these guys do on a smaller scale because we're smaller utilities. We still do the same due diligence that we had to do under the when we were regulated by the PSC. We just were able to get that law passed that says we're self-regulated because we don't, as nonprofits and community owned or member owned, we have no incentive to jack up rates because we give all that money back to our members at the end of the year anyhow. So I just want to make that clear that we're self-regulated and we still do all of the same due diligence that these guys do. I gave you 2 handouts and I corrected the map from the one I handed out last night. The top one, this is from the Public Service Commission's website, and this is all the certificated service territories. The one I had last night just had the co-ops, but this has all of them. And then the second map is a map of state sections across the state. And the point for showing these to you is there's a lot of state sections that cover every, across every utility service territory. And I know not all of these would be deregulated zones, once the bill became law, but the potential is there. And I'll get to that potential, which is what gives us some pause on this. The certificated service territories are the lifeblood of every utility, not just the co-ops. Knowing that whatever new customer, whether it's a new subdivision or a crypto miner or some large industrial load, when they locate into our service territory, we know that we will have to provide service. We get to, or we have to, depending on how you look at it, have to provide that service. And as Mark, I think, mentioned, additional load within any service territory helps everybody else in that territory by improving reliability and at best lowering rates and at the very least keeping rates level. We plan for the future knowing that our respective service territories will remain intact. Now, I'm going to digress a little bit, Senator Rothfuss, and I know this isn't the intent or what we're talking about, but I just want to kind of give you an idea. In a fully deregulated market, the cooperatives we feel would be threatened by the ability of another utility to come in and basically cherry pick some of our large loads. I think coal mines up in the Powder River Basin, some other large gas processing plants, where when these service territories and the co-ops were formed over 80 years ago, it wasn't profitable for these investor-owned utilities to serve those loads or even serve that area. Those loads may not have even been there, 80 years ago, but you're gonna locate the gas processing plant where you have to, and one of those happens to be in co-op territory. And so, and the reason the co-ops were formed, we average about in Wyoming about 4 meters per mile of line. So that means for every mile that we invest in, we only have 4 customers or 4 meters for every mile. And we cover a lot of miles, right? We cover about 75% of the landmass in Wyoming. And so our density numbers makes it such that we're always going to have, I still think we're competitive, but we're always going to have slightly higher rates than my investor-owned brethren, with the exception of like Lower Valley. They are the beneficiary of very cheap hydro. And they like to brag that they have the lowest rates in the country, which is true. But for the most part, if we don't have access to that low-cost hydro, we're going to be slightly higher. And so fast forward to these industrial zones, or unregulated industrial zones, that's still going to be the case. Our ability to compete at that is good because of our density numbers and our long distances is still going to be probably not as competitive. And I'd like to go back to Representative Stitt's question, what's the harm? And I'll give you an example. I don't know if I did a good enough job of this earlier, but right now, and I'm going to get into some good news here. I'm going to end up on some good news. We have several mining operations talking to some of our co-ops. I'll use Wheatland as an example, Wheatland REA. They're located right there at Laramie River Station. They're talking to, they have 5 NDAs signed right now with mining operations, crypto mining operations. And so say they sign a contract, or maybe not even get to the point of signing a contract, but they have these NDAs and they're doing the due diligence and all this. This bill becomes law, and this crypto mining company that Wheatland's been working with says, oh, we got this new place where we want to go. Now, if somebody can come in and underbid Wheatland REA, then that's a lost load. And we lose that load, the potential load, right? That's a loss to Wheatland REA. So I hope that kind of explains what the harm would be, particularly in our situation. And so I guess our question on this bill is the risk to existing customers potentially losing those future loads, is it worth the reward of having what could be a very good large load, but temporary, come into the state and then to leave these huge investments? It might be. I mean, I'm with you, Senator Rothfuss and Mr. Reville. I like what you guys are talking about. I think we all like what you're talking about. I just don't know if this is the right tool. And, you know, this is, I believe, the 3rd meeting that you all have had. The first one where I think it was Senator Nethercott that came up with this unregulated zone, or might have been you, the name for it, right? And then you had a 2nd meeting, and this is the 3rd meeting on this. And, you know, I don't have my backup guy, Brad Nevergall, who came to one of the first meeting when we talked about this in the room today. He couldn't make it, but if it turns out to not be the right tool, then maybe we gather the big brains and come up with what is the right tool, because I think we all want to get there. Growth is good for us. Growth is good for the state. And despite, you know, some people may be thinking this is a waste of time if this bill doesn't go anywhere or doesn't do anything, maybe we still continue that conversation and figure out what is the right tool. I don't know. These guys have a lot more experience on that down in the weeds kind of stuff. And we have plenty of people with our G&Ts, Basin and Tri-State and Deseret on the wholesale side of things that could help come up with that other tool or a new tool. And we're willing to do that because it's pretty exciting. And the exciting part is what's happening in the state right now with respect to the co-ops. So Tri-State, who I've mentioned before, and Brad was here, Brad Nevergall, who's the Senior Vice President of Energy Management, came and talked about what they're doing. But they're actively working with our co-ops to attract crypto mining operations, and have been engaged in numerous conversations. They work with the Business Council. The Business Council passes on leads to crypto mining companies to Tri-State and others, I'm assuming. And the Tri-State Board recently approved a significant transaction in Wyoming over in Laramie County within High West Energy Service Territory that will, if it comes to fruition, create jobs, property taxes, sales and tax revenue, and helps also ensure the longevity of Laramie River Station, LRS, the power plant out of Wheatland, which is partially owned by Tri-State. Furthermore, Tri-State and Wheatland REA that I mentioned have jointly met with many prospective operations. As I mentioned, Tri-State Wheatland has 5 non-disclosure agreements signed with various operations. They're talking at locating one of these loads at the LRS Energy Park, which is just south of the power plant there. Tri-State is also working with its partners at the Missouri Basin Power Project, which is the kind of operating entity of LRS, to determine potential lease terms for land that could be made available to new Wheatland REA members like a crypto mining operation. Tri-State remains committed to working with their members to determine load growth opportunities. Growth is load growth opportunities in Wyoming. And in October of last year, they had a webinar talking to their systems. Brad led this webinar talking to their systems about loads associated with crypto mining, data centers, and blockchain. Powder River Energy up in the northeast corner of the state, they're a member of Basin Electric, another G&T. They also have been talking, and I don't know if they have NDAs signed with anybody yet, but they've talked to several mining companies that are interested with them as well. And what does High West, Wheatland REA, and Precor all have in common? Excess power. All right. Due to what's happened in Colorado, that will probably in the future restrict how much power Tri-State can take off of LRS and import into Colorado. That's going to leave some stranded capacity there. Perfect place for a mining or any other large power load. Powder River, because of the decline in coal bed methane, the decline in production in coal, oil, and gas up in their service territory, excess power coming out of the Dry Fork station, right? Perfect opportunity. And then High West Energy has a brand new substation that has excess capacity. So these are where the stars align and where we might be able to, offer somebody a reasonable rate, good transmission rates, and get it up and running sooner rather than later. If the industrial zone, unregulated zone bill passes, then that might threaten what we have already been working on and what we potentially could do within our service territories.
So Sean, I think all of us would be happy to vote this bill down if you can change the NFL overtime rules. Okay.
I'm working on it.
If you can deliver on that, this bill is dead. Mr. Chairman, and as a follow-up, what if we did something perhaps equally as nutty and took this bill and then excluded all the co-ops from the application of the bill? So 75% of the territory of Wyoming, and let you sell into zones in Black Hills territory or Rocky Mountain Power's territory. How would you feel about that?
I wouldn't like it. Because it threatens the integrity of the service territories, just like I would want them serving into our territory. And if I could just wrap up real quick, I just want to, the reasons I give you these examples with High West, Precor, and Wheatland is they're happening organically, right? No mandates have been out there. This bill isn't in place yet, and so it's happening organically, and we hope we can kind of keep it that way. It may not be happening as quickly as anybody or everybody would like, but again, is speed? Do we err on the caution of speed and getting something done that could or could not work? That could potentially still be a risk to our existing members. I think that's it. Oh, the other handout I gave you guys was a letter from Wheatland RA talking about what they're doing, their concerns with the bill. And one last thing I'd just like to read to you, because I got this on my way over to Laramie today. And this is from Don Smith, the general manager at Wheatland. He was on the phone. I tried calling him earlier, and he was on the phone with a crypto developer looking at the Wheatland area. And he was telling me that there are very few banks that will loan on this industry. And one he is in communication with is asking questions about renewable energy. It goes to the ESG issue. The bank is using this as one of the qualifiers for financing, and the developer is desiring to build some solar to supplement his load, but Wyoming does not have incentives for renewable energy. So we're looking at, we have excess capacity from coal-fired power plants, but these mining operations may not be able to get the financing because it is coal-fired power. So I just wanted to share that kind of another hurdle that it's nothing that we are doing or the state is doing. So I'll wrap it up.
Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Taylor. So I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. One of your concerns with this bill is that in this case in Wheatland, if this passes, say a miner comes along and they need 5 megawatts of power, whatever the number is. If this passes, then that gives them the ability to say no and go to one of your competitors. If this bill doesn't pass, we fall back in the way the regs are right now, could they do that anyway?
I think that's kind of the same question that Chairman Olson asked, right? Yes, they could, but I guess my point is if we're negotiating with a mining Mr. Chairman, if we're negotiating with a mining company right now, and we see the benefits that that company could bring to our members in our certificated service territory, and then the bill becomes law, and not to throw Black Hills under the bus, but I will, they come in and say, and we're talking to them about 5-cent power, just as an example. I don't know what we're talking to them about right now, but we're negotiating right now with them for 5-cent power. The zones come in Black Hills or anybody else, or out of state third party power marketer comes in and says, we can give it to you for 2.5-cent power. Then they pull the plug on Wheatland, and there goes our lost load. Does that make sense? It's not plugged in yet, but we see the benefits of it, and the good that it could do all over our system. And then now they just pull up stakes and say, no, we're going to go with these guys. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, well, Mr. Taylor, so maybe there's a way to build, I don't know if there's a way to build that into the legislation, but as you know, the bill exempts existing contracts after a certain date, right? So I get that you're talking about the limbo phase, right? You're talking about, well, we're in negotiations. We don't actually have a contract. I don't know if there is if there is a way to exempt whatever, those negotiations out. Certainly would entertain that as an option. I don't know your industry well enough to know what the NDA is, but I don't know that necessarily, from my experience as an attorney, necessarily means there's actual negotiations. There may be all kinds of reasons that I throw one of those out to 3 different providers in 3 different areas to begin my talks. I don't know that it necessarily means negotiations, but if there's something else that solidifies that, and we're able to protect those existing negotiations, would certainly welcome that. At the same time, wouldn't you agree that it would just simply incentivize the providers to make the deal before the legislation goes in? That's the reality.
Mr. Chairman, I guess to some extent, yeah, and I don't know what another safeguard could be, put in, because then let's fast forward. Say this bill does become law, and a year from now, crypto company or a data center or a hydrogen facility comes in, and even a small crypto mining facility, 50 megawatts is a big deal to the rural electrics, because we're small and we need that load growth. But then, and this kind of goes to our fear of a unregulated state. So a year from now, these are in place. Again, we're talking 4-cent power. It would be a great boom to our communities and our service territory and our co-ops. Somebody else comes in and underbids us at 3 cents, and we lose that potential load.
Yeah, just one last piece on that final thought, which is that if I've understood the conversation up to this point, though, the co-ops or the rural electrics are the only ones with excess power to even really make those larger projects a reality, right? Which is why you have a half a dozen NDAs. So is that hypothetical rooted in reality that those that are friends without that excess power load would actually would they be able to, it's not a question of whether they'd be able to bid a lower power. They don't even have the excess power load to provide it. At least that's what I've been told.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would agree with that. And that's now. It's not, we didn't forecast excess power 5 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago. So it changes enough that the threat is still always going to be there.
Co-Chairman Rothfuss.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And hearing those examples, it makes me think that folks on this side of the table should be wanting this bill, because the scenarios that you just put forward as a co-op with your differential and regulation, I don't think they could do what you just described. I don't think they get to do that. As the idea that you can hook somebody up right next to the Wheatland facility and direct sell power and recognize that the cost is diminished because you don't have significant transmission. So you can provide that that's really handy. And actually that's one of the intended advantages of this to provide that opportunity really to any power producer. And again, I don't know that aspect of it then affects the cooperatives because you are empowered to do that already. But it's interesting to hear that the scenario you lay out is exactly the type of scenario we were hoping for at a much larger scale with this type of legislation. And I guess I'd be curious to hear whether you could do that same type of just agreement. And it was quick too. I mean, it sounds like you're doing things quickly. You're just offloading power. You can set the price however you want. You don't have to go through the regulated utility and get any type of tariff for that. So what you did, could either of you do that?
Well, I have all the mics now.
Do you want another here?
Yeah, sure. Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, there's a blending of a few things in there. And I think that's a little bit of an oversimplification. So again, we have the most flexibility as a regulated IOU when we have excess distribution, generation, or transmission in an area. So in the hypothetical of just a Bitcoin operation wanting to open up a data center near, let's say, substation X, that's an investor-owned utility substation. You know, I could probably work with that customer if there was excess transmission there and work under the existing tariff to run them a line extension, put that in, and then charge them what our tariff power would be, 4 cents, 5 cents. They'd be getting the benefit of the whole system that other customers have invested in for reliability, and it would be there. So that's that small kind of example. You know, the wholesale sale example of buying power at wholesale and then being able to resell. You know, I think that's an entirely different scenario that, you know, subject frankly to FERC regulation. So I don't think it's just they can do it and we can't. I think that we can do some things under the existing regulated tariff. Could we do more? I'd like to do more. But if there's going to be an incentive and changes in regulation, we'd like to see it in that context within the regulated utility structure and at the commission with improved incentives and tariffs from the commission that would allow us more flexibility to meet those customer needs.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think we all understand we're definitely not going to convince any of you that you're not better off with the regulated territory and the monopolistic features that you do have. Not a true monopoly, but certainly portions of it. And one of those that we talked a little bit about that really concerns me, and it gets to the 1.9 or so gigawatts of demand that you can effectively deny on behalf of a substantial portion of the state of Wyoming unilaterally. There's no scrutiny. And I think you appropriately characterized it as your own internal business decision, where the interests that you're representing are the board shareholders and folks that are appropriately the ones that are backing that business. With Rocky, same thing. With the co-op, I mean, the co-op's a little different, but still, it's the cooperative members that are looking out for their own interests at the end of the day, and that's very reasonable. The interesting nuance about this system is we have one, let's see, it's Powder River Energy. The northeastern corner of the state, Powder River Energy decides on behalf of whether a 300 megawatt project is going to show up and ever be located there. We don't get consulted. The legislature's out of that decision. Your board for that particular entity literally gets to decide, no, we don't believe in that company. We decided we don't like their values. We don't like what they stand for. We don't like their product. We hate crypto mining. Any of those is a good enough reason to decline a 300 megawatt project in the northeastern part of the state. Southwestern part of the state, same type of thing. If it doesn't meet your 30 to 50 year build out schedule, if it doesn't meet what the state regulatory structure through the PSC requires of you, on behalf of the state of Wyoming, you deny the southwestern part of the state, a substantial portion of the state, and some of the rest of it. from having access to a few hundred megawatts of power or whatever the project is. This is where we get into the portion of the monopoly that I think causes us challenges. And, you know, it's really hard to look at history and say, point to different times when a decision was not made because of this feature. But we don't have a lot of large power consumption, new projects that come online in Wyoming. I mean, we're hearing clamoring, well, I'd sure like that 250 megawatt project. I don't think you would necessarily, because you'd have to plan this out over 30 to 50 years and incorporate it in rate base. It would be very complicated. It would go through all of the permitting that we discussed. There's no ability to do anything quickly with a little bit of risk, although the co-ops get to do that a little bit in the current system. And as noted, with the kind of conservative mentality, well, we don't want to take that risk because we're doing fine. That decision's on behalf of all of the people of the state of Wyoming, because there's not a free market from the standpoint of competition in any location. Rocky Mountain Power decides whether cryptocurrency mining is happening in Laramie, Wyoming, my hometown, right where we're at. And it's just a matter of, no, we don't have that capacity. Nobody else, you don't get to answer. You don't get to come back to the table and say, we've got the capacity. Nope. And I'm not saying it's a bad decision. I'm not saying you're even necessarily wrong about the credit worthiness of this entity, but one corporation's view of credit worthiness might not be the same as one of your cooperative's views, and you might have excess power available. The idea that each entity individually gets to decide a significant economic development choice for the people of Wyoming as we're struggling really is a concern. And that's where we get it again, obviously no intent to fully deregulate, but I'll ask again, and we can all think about it, hopefully, over the next weeks, months. If not this, then what? What gets us to the point where I want that full 1.9 gigawatts. I want every last watt of that located in Wyoming. But I don't hold it against your company for saying, no, it's not in your interests. It's in the state of Wyoming's interest to have every one of those 1.9 gigawatts here. It is. And to maybe try a little harder and see if we can get them credit worthy. I mean, there's a lot of interests we have, and we're having all of these hearings. We're struggling. We're trying to identify ways. And literally for you guys, it's like, yeah, we don't have that, we don't have that capacity. So no. Yeah.
I don't have an answer. I have a question,
Okay.
if I may, Mr. Chairman. Basically the reason, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think you've heard it. One of the reasons that we would say no is because the risk, right? And so if every utility in Wyoming says, no, we can't take that risk, then what's that company do? Goes to Texas. Or they build their own generation that they have to consume and can't sell that onto the market. So who assumes the risk to get these companies to come here? And I've said before, if it pencils out, and I don't want anyone to think that because we have 6 or 7 discussions or negotiations or NDAs going on right now around the state, none of them may come to fruition. And it may be because it doesn't pencil out for our members. And so you're right. So then can they go to Black Hills with no excess capacity or excess transmission? It's a quicker no probably than the negotiations that we've had. So it is all about risk.
Mr. Chairman, but it isn't all about risk. That is a key factor, and that's what governs what you're doing. But that is not your only primary interest. I mean, you have a cooperative with lots of different interests. They literally vote on things. If I were to try and characterize the Wyoming legislature's vote on something and try to factor it into one word, I don't know what that word would be. It probably wouldn't be flattering. But at the end of the day, the idea that it's one simple factor is not accurate. Now, what you have in a traditional marketplace where you have competition is the idea that one person's unacceptable risk is another person's acceptable risk. And it's a matter of trying to bring capital and secure different agreements and put them together. What we have in this circumstance of regulation is a flat out one answer denial. And again, the idea that the whole state of Wyoming is just like fully fungible for any transaction. And well, if I don't get what I want in Laramie County, I'll go over to Laramie and then I'll go over to Rock Springs. That's not fully accurate either. And there are a lot of times when you have specific localizations of interest. We know with cryptocurrency mining, which is kind of the impetus for this, that there's a lot of flexibility in the location. But that's not all of our projects. And this legislation, sometimes you might need some water. Sometimes you might need other resources. Sometimes it might matter where you're located in the state, whether there's a utility line, whether there's a gas line or whatever else. So the idea that we require geographical shopping because our 100-year-old regulated utility structure is useful for the utilities that are regulated under it, and I agree that it is, provides a preference for your corporations relative to the other corporate interests that we might have in Wyoming. We all know of cryptocurrency miners that are right here in Wyoming, right? They're from Wyoming, not folks that are trying to come from around the world, but they're looking for low cost power and they're looking for competition also. So we're picking one corporation or a series of corporations' interests, and we're elevating it above their interests. You said, well, you know, they'd be able to come along and maybe they could offer 4-cent power where we can only offer 5 cents. That dismisses the fact that somebody over here is a business in Wyoming that benefits from 4-cent power disproportionately to the 5-cent power, and basically says we're going to hand over the authority and the preference to the utility in that circumstance. Now, I understand it's more complicated than that, and I understand everything we've talked about for the regulated utility side, where we want redundancy, we want all of the reliability and everything else that we regulate through the PSC. So I get it when we're talking about that build out, and I get why all of that goes into the rate base. But again, when you get into these larger projects where it's new load, I am still failing to understand why we have to protect the utilities in that circumstance rather than the consumer, when a market approach that would allow them to access each of you and to walk up and have a conversation. I want to build a project in Laramie. What can you do for me? What can you do for me? What can you do for me? I don't see why, if I'm consuming 200 megawatts and the answer from most of you is nothing because we don't have 200 megawatts, is an unreasonable conversation. And again, I don't think we can be married to this particular piece of legislation as perfection, but at least it's a vehicle that tries to provide that conversation when that conversation needs to happen. If we need to have minimum megawatt requirements, if there are characteristics of this legislation that help to provide the protection so that we're doing what we can to protect the traditional ratepayer and the residential customers and even the lower power consumption businesses, that's great. Let's find those details. But when someone comes along and looks at the state of Wyoming and says, I need 500 megawatts of power and I want it in the northeastern part of the state, and they come to one of your co-ops and say, I need 500 megawatts of power, and they say, you're not credit worthy. And that's the end of the conversation. And then they look to another state and they develop whatever they want to develop. I think on behalf of the state, that's not acceptable, right? We shouldn't be shut out of that negotiation because one of your boards decides that it's not in the best interest of the state. Your boards don't speak for the state. Right? I mean, and nothing, no offense, I know they're great people, right? I've interacted with them for years. These are great people that care a lot about Wyoming, and we value them and we value their opinions. But at the end of the day, they don't speak for the state. They speak for the interests of their cooperative, as they should. So when we're legislating for the whole state. We're trying to make sure that that person that wants to set up the business, they've got a fair shot. And that your co-ops have a fair shot, and that all the rest of the people have a fair shot too. And we've built a system which is not atypical of monopolies, that's a little bit slanted one direction. So how do we address that? And again, if not this, then what? Which we can explore and we can brainstorm, we can work on it a little bit more, hopefully. And again, if it needs some more parameters, I don't know why any of you would be offended if it was 100 megawatt minimum load. I mean, it sounds like you might have 100 megawatts someplace and you've got 50 to 100, which I misinterpreted. I don't know what Rocky has, but we're talking like maybe there'd be 3 applications in a year for that. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but we can't hear Sean online.
Oh, Sean, your mic died. Thanks, Representative.
Okay, so I guess my question is, are we wedded to this in terms of having to run it through the upcoming budget session? Or I think it would be more beneficial that we pull a lot more people in than you've heard of, especially from my perspective. Our wholesale, our G&T guys can really jump into the weeds and probably do a better job of answering your question as to whether or not, why is this a bad idea? And why do we get to decide for the whole state? Because I tend to agree with you on that matter. But so I guess that's my question. If we could possibly table it and then start a kind of a offshoot conversation and have some technical conferences at the PSC with anybody and everybody that wants to come there to find the right thing. Because like I said, this is the third meeting where we've talked about this, and it's a big deal, as you can tell. So that would maybe be a suggestion.
Yeah, we can have both. I agree. We can have both.
Yeah.
We can advance this legislation and we can continue to work on a solution. But you've been in this game much longer than me, Senator, but I just in my short baby time in the legislature, the one thing that I am never in favor of is just kicking the can for all kinds of political reasons. And I think I want a world of both. That right now, this is the vehicle we have in front of us. I think all of us on both sides of this conversation are recognizing that it is not necessarily the vehicle we want. We want to work to find that better vehicle. I think it's going to end up with both.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, to respond. And I agree. I'm still convinced at this point that this moves us in a better direction and moves us forward. What I'm not convinced of is that it is the best outcome. And I'd like to keep moving in this direction. And then if we come up with something that is a better outcome through additional work, through feedback. But again, I've heard zero alternatives, right? And given a choice between a bill that I think does move us towards this flexibility, and I still think it's I understand your concerns, and if I were in your seat, I would definitely have the same concerns. That would be my responsibility. And I think you're representing the interests of the folks back home well. But at the same time, this still moves us in the direction that we want to be going. And I see it as positive. I don't share the concerns that it's somehow, and ironically, both concerns of this is too quick and this is way too slow have come out. I don't know which one will occur. Hopefully, happy Goldilocks middle is how it will proceed. But there are a lot of checks in this. It's not just, opening Pandora's box and letting loose deregulation. It's very, very constrained. So let's keep working, but I don't want to slow down progress either. And I hope it will provide the motivation for folks to say, hey, what you want to accomplish is understood. This is the way we can do that. And I want to hear that. And then the moment we get a better idea, we'll jump horses.
Commissioner Petrie has been patiently waiting to jump in. His hand's been raised for a while. I'm sorry,
He's patient,
Commissioner, but certainly you're welcome to join us.
Thank you. I just wanted to add sort of a clarifying comment. Earlier, I believe Mr. Steggy might have mentioned the regulatory compact. And we do need to remember that there are two sides to the regulatory compact. It comes with obligations. You get a monopoly territory. Of course, it's a supervised monopoly where the commission is there to simulate the beneficial effects of competition the best we can. And that, is certainly not perfect. Nothing generally is. But there is also an obligation to provide the service demanded in that territory. And so it's not quite the case that our public utilities, whether they're cooperatives or investor-owned utilities, have sort of a veto power for development. The catch is, though, that the would-be customer, the new coming customer who wants service and approaches the utility is obligated to pay for what might need to be done to accommodate them. So it's not quite the case that the utility can just say, no, we don't like your kind, so go away. If they did that, I would very much expect that the commission would hear about it. And there would be a complaint brought to the commission that the utility was failing to meet its obligation to provide the service demanded in its territory. Now, the cost of a major project could be prohibitive for a business, and they might not want to pay that. They might not like the terms that the utility insists on pursuant to their service extension tariff, but it is the case that there's an obligation that comes with the grant of a certificate territory. So I just want to clear that up so that nobody is operating on an error there.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner, for clarifying that. And I think, obviously as we're moving forward and we are not the corporations committee who may have the expertise on utility we're building that expertise. So I think better understanding all of that certainly helps us as we go forward.
And Mr. Chairman, we'd be happy to.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry about that.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Chairman, the commission would be happy to participate in ongoing discussions, whatever the fate of this bill is.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Other public comment. I'm sure you guys you're as dismissed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dave, your flag's in distress, and I don't know if it's because of the topic or because of last night's game. Both. All right.
Right. Yeah, we're all Bengals fans now.
Other public comment in the virtual world. How many? Who? 3? And they are. That's right. Powder River Resource. Yep. Okay, let them all in. Any other public comment in the room? All right. We will, we're going to take these brief public comments and then we will take a break. I apologize for that. Okay, Shannon.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shannon Anderson with Powder River Basin Resource Council. And I'd like to take a step up, I think, in terms of the actual legislation. And you might remember my testimony from December in your December meeting. And I'd really like to focus a little bit on the first part of the bill, so the non-utility part of the bill, really, and dealing, I think, specifically with the public hearing and notice requirements. So if you kind of work through the bill, and this goes to what Mr. Acey was saying, I think, earlier about is sort of an odd process. And so you're dealing with a county commission who is petitioning on behalf of, some industrial customer to the state lands board, and then the state lands board then consults with the Public Service Commission and somehow makes a decision. And it's an awkward process. And I think, first of all, you have to start from the requirements of the need to have a public meeting of the county commissioners in order to decide whether to petition at all. And then they have to have a public hearing to decide, to take feedback on that petition process. And then they're petitioning to the state lands board. And if you look at page 4 and 5 of your legislation, there's no public hearing when you get to the state land board. And there's also, the timing is a little bit off. So you have, this commission report, but there's no requirement that the commission report is given prior to, again, a public hearing where interested members of the public can then review that report from the Public Service Commission, comment on it, provide additional information to the State Lands Board, who, again, as Mr. Crowder associated earlier, it's a little bit unclear in the bill whether or not the State Land Board even makes a decision. It talks about, they may consider this information, but it doesn't actually talk about when and how they make the decision and what public process is afforded to members of Wyoming. This is our state lands, and we should have some ability to have a say in how those lands are developed, and how the State Land Board then makes a decision. Admittedly, they are a public agency. They're subject to the open meetings laws, all of those other things, again, in the existing statute. But there needs to be, I think, clarity that there is, in fact, a public hearing about this petition from the county, what that process looks like. And again, I think how the public gets involved in that process. Specifically, again, that this is, typically in agricultural areas. These are industrial development of agricultural areas, is significant for zoning, for neighbors, for existing users of those state lands, if there's, agricultural lessees on those state lands. So, we just really believe that you should make clear that the process, and whether you make it clear in, the state lands law, or, here in Title 37, where it's a little bit awkward because we're dealing with Public Service Commission statutes. It needs to be clear somewhere how this all works together between the county, the state lands, and the Public Service Commission. Who makes what decision when and how the public can get involved. It's not clear to me. And I deal with the APA on a daily basis. I can tell you it's not clear. And I know you're shaking your head and you think it is, but it's not. So I really implore you to think about that. Again, this is development of, state lands. It's our public land. So it's really important that we allow the public to participate in that process. Now turning to the utility part on page 5, there, line 11, I think there's a question for me about, so you have for the sale of electricity to a customer. And again, I think there's a question of once you designate these industrial zones that are deregulated, does everybody in this industrial zone have to be deregulated? Is it a customer choice? How does that work? And I think specifically, again, there may be existing customers of a utility in some of these zones already. For instance, someone with a stock well, an oil and gas well, some other piece of development on that state land. Do they have to participate as a deregulated customer? Or are they, is it okay if they're already regulated to stay regulated? How does that work if there's multiple customers within one of these zones? And then, again, to Romanet 2 has been discussed earlier. I just think it's really important to highlight that this is commercial or industrial use. That's significantly broad. It's not limited to blockchain or cryptocurrency mining. And I think it's really important to think about the Pandora's box that we do open potentially with this. And are we talking, shopping centers? Are we talking, any other use that may come in and want to take advantage of this system? This is a pretty big change in how we regulate utility customers in our state. And then I think, when we get to page 7, and the F section that you all added in this version of the bill, appreciate that. I think it's a good addition. The challenge that you have is that transmission is not it. You're not including all of the generation and facility costs that will be jointly used by regulated and non-regulated customers. So I think it's important to make this broader. It's not just, and there's 2 kinds of transmission lines to start with. And so I think it's important to make sure that all of those shared costs are included in this section. And it's not just about the big transmission lines. It's a lot more than that. And again, it's, you kept asking, I think, the question, and I appreciated it, to the utilities about, what's the harm? And I'd frame the question a little bit differently to you. And what's the harm, not to the companies, but to the customers, right? I mean, that is the charge that you have as legislators, is the charge that utilities have as public entities, essentially, for the state of Wyoming. It's not for their shareholders, it's for their customers. And to make sure that those customers are protected in the certificated territory that we grant those utilities. I would just on page 9 note that the comments made earlier, I think, about rulemaking. And specifically, I question again whether the counties are going to need rulemaking time, and just it's frankly impossible to do rulemaking between March and July. I mean, it just isn't going to happen by any agency. And so if I would either take it out or not have it at all, if that's what we really want to do, because you're going to have a really bad rule if you rush it through in that period of time. I would say, I would question state lands, and maybe they can provide some feedback for you on this, but I mean, I assume that there would need to be some kind of rulemaking about the permitting process, financial assurance, how leasing is done in these deregulated zones. Again, what is the public process of all of that, and how state lands makes decisions about what businesses, commercial and industrial, come into these deregulated zones. And that again goes back to our public lands and how they're used and developed. So again, I know that the time is late and you've had a long day, and it seems like you're already in favor of this bill, moving it forward. So there's my comments, and I hope I can answer any questions you have. Thanks.
Committee? Questions for Shannon? All right, Shannon, thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
All right, who's next? Brendan, I see you.
Great. Can everybody hear me? Good. Yes, my
Yes.
name is Brendan Marr. I am a MIT Media Laboratory alumnus from '98 and a computer scientist. And committee, I would like to briefly just speak to what the committee has already mentioned, and backing up Mr. Ravel's points, that at the end of the day, this is not really about energy alone. It's about information and the processing of information in data centers. And I just really don't understand when the panel earlier discussing and in the power generators were discussing their loss of a hold, loss of a customer. It's a little beyond me that, I mean, have they not used the internet? Have they not found that there's no end to the internet? We're talking about the ability to increase their revenue, 1,000x. I mean, the information is limitless if Wyoming can provide the power. The other thing I just wanted to say is on a marketing level, maybe it needs to be changed to something along the lines of a energy and information technology development zone, because it really captures both the energy component and the information technology aspect of all this. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Questions for Mr. Mark? All right, Brandon, thank you. Appreciate it. Is it Sean? Sean's our last. Sean, are you the last one?
I think so.
Get
Everyone, yes. Can you hear me?
got
Okay.
you right. Okay, go ahead.
All right, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman,
we can hear you.
members,
Go ahead.
yeah, members of the select committee. There's been a lot of discussion today, and I think it's been a good process to break down some very complicated things, but I'm hoping to just simplify them here with my comments, because this this is very complicated. And, Senator Rothfuss, you've done a great job, I think, advocating for really owners, business owners in the state.
Hey,
And
Sean,
yes,
Sean,
yes.
sorry, could you just back up and start by introducing yourself and if you
Yes.
represent an organization, that organization?
Yes, my
Thanks.
name is Sean Murphy. I am an advisor and investor in the crypto industry, and the one company that I do advise for, the crypto mining one, they've asked that, given some NDAs and some announcements that are forthcoming, that they be not named in this meeting. But there are a lot of interests looking to mine in the state, and Mr. Ravel also talked about the wider nature of this. But I think this bill is good in theory. It brings revenue to the state and it provides for economic development. It brings large consumers in. And the crux of this, though, is there has to be a compelling rate. It's the price. It's all about kilowatt per hour for miners and for data centers. And nothing, and this parallels my comments several months ago, there's nothing in this legislation that is either a carrot or a stick with the utility companies. I want to thank the utilities for their candor today, but we heard them say they can still say no. They're not sure if this is the tool. This doesn't help them do this. I'm quoting words that were shared today, and that's exactly what will happen if it's passed the way that it's written right now. It's not going to get done for companies, industry, and commercial operations coming in. They're going to say no. They're not going to have any kind of leverage or negotiation abilities. And this is going to look a lot like the special utility agreement legislation that was passed, where it looks good sitting there, but no one uses it. And that's where we're headed on this course. So what I'm hoping to do here is propose really just one thing, but it has a couple of layers. And that's this idea of the carrot or stick model to help move the utilities in the direction of providing close to market pricing in these deregulated power zones. I think it's going to be difficult to have wholesale pricing, and this idea of bigger brains needing to assemble is going to be needed to do that. One idea is, and certainly not at risk of hurting consumers, but subsidizing transmission or providing incentive or tax credits to help with transmission. The other issue is going to be pricing, right? And if the companies can't go to the utility and negotiate a good price, they're just going to go where they can. And they've done that. This idea of 19/20ths empty that co-chairman Rothfuss told us, that's exactly the problem here. We have 1/20th having the opportunity to be served, and everyone else is leaving. And they've done that. They've gone to Texas, Oklahoma, and New York. So we have to find a way to create a delta there with that market pricing. Maybe it's 10%, that it has to be within 10% of a market price, and the utilities can't charge more than that. Maybe there's some tax credit scheme we can devise where insurance companies are helping offset this. But there has to be something that we either use as a carrot or a stick to help them not say no, or really to help the utilities say yes. And this idea that it's all about risk, that's not compelling. Rocky Mountain Power is owned by Berkshire Hathaway. And now we're talking about, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates being two of the largest, most wealthy billionaires in the entire world. And these are the people that are operating in our state. So we have to find a better way to help everyone else. So I'm calling on this legislation to really do that in a way that provides a carrot and or a stick. I think a carrot is a great option here, but really it's incentives, tax credits, something that helps the utilities that were sitting here before us today say yes. And we have some great utilities, and Rocky Mountain Power is a giant company. They've said no because they can. They don't need to say yes in Wyoming. And Black Hills, I want to applaud them, thank them, congratulate them. They really have been innovative in their approach, and they've really tried. But in many ways, when you're an oligarch, I think monopoly is the wrong word, but when you're an oligarch, you have the ability to say no. You set the tone, and in a lot of ways we're seeing that. So I hope we can update this legislation again with carrots and sticks to help move the utilities in a direction that really helps them serve these contracts. Thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, I'm here.
Committee. carrots and sticks, but not celery sticks. I can't stand celery.
You juice this, juice those.
All right.
Chairman.
Any other things? Thanks for your comment. We do appreciate it. Any other public comment? Going back to the room. Yes, sir.
There. And I just wanted to say thanks for mentioning the people a lot, because there's a lot of talk of representing the state and the state's interests. And I was just cleaning out my car the other day, and I had an old newspaper. I couldn't figure out why I kept it. And it was talking about during a legislative session, looking at bills about what the hospitals and businesses wanted. I read it through a few times. I showed it to people. I said, I can't find a single sentence talking about what the people of Wyoming want. And I found that kind of distressing. And so I'm glad that that's on the minds of you guys representing the people in the state. So just wanted to applaud you for that and holding a good position, advancing the bill instead of being talked into kicking the can down the road, and then maybe they'll negotiate. I think it's a really wise idea to advance the bill and operate from that position of strength if moving forward with the future committee meetings with the oil companies or with the energy companies. So thank you, Kame.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. Any other public comment? All right, let's close public comment. Let's take a 10-minute break. So what is that? 4:50 or 5:09. 5:09.
Get it right.
We ready to come back on the live stream? We are live.
We never stopped being live.
We never stopped being live. Yeah. All right, we are back. The House of Representatives is in full force showing up, and the
Senator Furphy.
Senate is almost. That's right. Yeah, okay, well, we ended with public comment, and now we will move to 22 LSO 0258 committee. What is your pleasure?
I'll move the bill.
Moved by Senator Rothfuss, seconded by Representative Western.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, please.
Mr. Chairman, as we noted while we were closing public comment, I think this bill is moving us in the right direction, but I'm hopeful that we'll have more discussion and try to find ways that we can address a lot of the interests that were raised and a lot of the concerns that were raised, while still keeping the spirit of this legislation where we're addressing large power needs in Wyoming. And I don't think that we have appropriate ways to address that. So this certainly moves us in that direction and provides some opportunities for solutions, not just for cryptocurrency miners, but for other projects in the long run, and solves some concerns that we've heard. But again, that conversation should remain open. And if we can find a better way to accomplish these objectives, then I'm certainly interested in hearing them. So let's keep moving forward. As you mentioned, kind of a parallel path. Let's keep moving this forward and then explore alternatives that can achieve those interests as well. To me, it really is unfortunate that there is no way in Wyoming to address that 1.9 gigawatts of demand. We just don't have a system that would allow us to do that. So what moves us in the direction where if somebody comes forward and says, I need 500 megawatts of power because I want to build a facility, that there is a collaboration and there are options and alternatives, and it's not locality shopping that determines whether or not they can achieve their outcome, but actually having some sort of a competitive marketplace at that scale. While at the same time, I will reiterate one more time, the importance of our regulated utility structure when it comes to residential customers and small businesses, where I think we all benefit from having that ability to count on reasonable rates and have PSC looking out for us all and working on our behalf to ensure that those that provision of power is reliable and reasonably priced. So with that, I support the legislation and look forward to the continued conversation.
Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some concerns, there's no doubt about it, but I do support the bill at this time, and I think we ought to go ahead and move it forward. But I think if there's any way that we can have some further comment for better possible addressing the concerns, and we can come up with some solutions, it would sure be good. I'm having a hard time seeing those at times, but yet at the same time, they're appearing to be pretty real and pretty concerned. So I just want people to know I am supporting it, but I do have concerns.
Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, I would echo some of what Senator Cost said, that I support the general approach we're taking and am concerned about perhaps some of the unintended consequences, but we can hopefully work through those and keep this conversation going.
Representative Yin, you good? You want to say anything?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, thank you. I do think that the intent is good, right? So we want to be able to have miners and or other businesses be able to come to Wyoming and get the lowest price that they possibly could, right? So having access to that spot pricing where they can use that market price at the lowest price at the time that it actually happens. My concern overall is the method that this legislation takes. I think the state lands part I think I get why we're doing that, but I don't totally agree that that's also a good reason to do it. What I would be interested in is wondering, so I know that other states have time of use pricing. Is there other ways for us to have retail providers expose some of the volatility of wholesale pricing for specific customers? So could a tariff rate be designed around that? I don't know. I think it really does require everyone to come together and try to figure out what are solutions to be able to access that pricing. I think overall, I think there's enough support on the committee to move it forward. I probably will vote no, though. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Yin. And I think, yeah, we could definitely do days and days of discussion. And the fact that we're, here now at 5:17 and off schedule a little bit is because of the wonderful dialogue that we were having with our friends in the utility industry. And I think we're all on the same page in that we want the best good for Wyoming. And I think what I take from the end of our conversation is that we do want to put all those minds in the same room and continue working on a solution. And for each of the gentlemen at the table throughout the day today, I'm confident that's what's going to happen, because I know who's sitting on that end of the table. And for us on this end of the table, I think it works the same way. And yeah, if for no other reason than all the reasons that have been stated, the necessity to keep the conversation moving forward and continue working for a solution, I think that's the best thing this committee can do at this time. So any other comments, committee? If not, I'll go ahead and let you vote. All right, go ahead and call the roll call vote on 22 LSO 0203.
Senator Furphy. Aye. Senator Cost. Aye. Senator Nethercott.
Excused.
Representative Stith.
Aye.
Representative Western. Representative Yin.
No.
Co-Chairman Rothfuss.
Aye.
Chairman Olson.
Aye.
That passes.
All right. All right, committee. Let's move to digital identity protection. And this is the update to our spoofing law. Mr. Hopkinson, give us a introduction of the bill 22 LSOs 0203, which I may have actually misstated and said that on the record. That's what you all voted on, so we're done. Oh, no, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Hopkinson with LSO, walking through 22 LSO 0203, working draft version 0.6. The committee did see this, an earlier version of this at its last meeting, and asked to incorporate some ideas presented by Mr. Kaufman, specifically relating to the trademark statutes. And we see that new section in 40-30-103 on page 2. And I would note for the committee, and I believe that addressed that in the staff comment, that this language comes from the Wyoming statute 40-1-112. How much the committee wants to keep it this way, the language is not how we would draft it today. If I were drafting this fresh, it doesn't quite coincide with a lot of our updated drafting conventions. But I just wanted to point that out for the committee. That's why you'll see some, particularly things like the use of such, which is not something we do anymore. In any case, what this language does is it provides that any person with a personal or organizational digital identity could proceed by suit to enjoin the use of any impersonations, counterfeits, or imitations thereof. And a court could grant an injunction to restrain that use. It could provide that all require them to pay all profits derived from the use or damages suffered by the reason of such wrongful use. And the court could enter up to 3 times any profits or damages and any reasonable attorney's fees to the prevailing party in the case where it finds that the wrongful act was done with knowledge or bad faith or otherwise, as the circumstances of the case merit. The enumeration of any right herein does not affect a person's right to prosecute under any penal law of this state. So this just essentially provides a civil action that an individual who has their personal or organizational digital identity impersonated, counterfeited, or otherwise imitated improperly. Section 2 is what the committee has seen before, which adds the into the spoofing statute. We see on line 15 and 16 that another person without consent intentionally impersonates another person or that person's personal or organizational digital identity. It adds the definitions of personal digital identity, just pointing out where those are in existing statute, as well as organizational digital identity. And the staff comment on the last page there just includes the entirety of the unlawful impersonation statute for the committee's reference. With that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Hopkinson? All right, David, thank you, as always. We have Mr. Allen and Mr. Greenwood. Are they in the virtual world waiting to come in?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Allen is not online with us today, but we do have 3 additional folks online, including
have
Daza.
Daza? Okay, just let all 3 in.
All 4.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, all 4. All right, folks, if you can, try to be concise and as I'm standing between all of these legislators and the rest of the public who wants to get on with their evening. So with that, I'm just having a hard time seeing some of you, but Daza? Maybe I don't have Daza. Okay, Mr. Marr?
Oh, yes. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Great. My name is Brendan Marr. I am on the Digital Identity Working Group. I would like to say, please consider higher fines. Good job. That concludes my testimony.
Perfect, Brendan. That was perfect in every way. Thank you. Questions, committee? Thank you. Daza, I saw you pop up now.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Daza Greenwood. I'm testifying in my individual capacity. And I want to speak in favor of this proposal, partly because I believe it very aptly extends the good work from last session on creating a definition for digital identity and then beginning to apply different parts of existing state law to that definition. And the first one that the drafting experts committee had recommended was this very section dealing with impersonation. To me, the language looks very tight. One thing I would just suggest as the committee contemplates adopting this proposed amendment and incorporating it is to consider it against multiple different online activities that the residents of Wyoming regularly undertake. I know that most of the context for this select committee is blockchain and Web3. But for example, as I was reading this language in the back of my head, I was wondering, how would this play out in something like a metaverse environment where the digital identity of an individual was like an avatar in some 3D space, for example. In particular, when people start to rack up valuable reputation and relationships and basically going about their other commercial and private lives in various ways in that digital environment. I think it lines up pretty well, but since the language is appropriately technology agnostic, I guess I would just encourage looking at it from different foreseeable angles in practice for within the useful probable life of the statute, which is what got to be, perhaps that's a 5 or 10 year horizon, to double check that it captures those. But I guess I'll conclude my remarks by saying this to me looks like an excellent proposed amendment that's directly in line with the recommendations of the drafting committee. Thank you.
Committee questions? Mr. Chairman? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
And I'll just point on that, and I think Desi, you were there for the last discussion, that the language is mirrored to other language elsewhere in statute, which is why we ended up using the language we did. And I think it's a task for my co-chairman and his judiciary committee to go back and make better language overall elsewhere in statute. And then we'll mirror the better language once he's done that. So if you have any ideas, keep contemplating it, because I think that's the path forward there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Thanks for reminding me of that project. Any other questions for Deza? Awesome. Thank you. All right. Unfortunately, either I can't see you or I don't know, or my other two individuals. So whichever one of you speaks first gets to go.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Select Committee.
That's you.
Thank you for your work. Digital identification protection is paramount in healthcare. I'm Dr. Alan Gee. I'm a board certified neurologist with 22 years of clinical practice experience here in Wyoming. I'm a Jackson Hole Technology Partnership board member and the founder of the Wyoming Health Innovation Living Laboratory. We share the mission with JHTP to identify cutting edge technologies relevant for rural populations and accelerate global accessibility. The Wyoming Health Innovation Living Laboratory is deploying digital technology solutions to address Wyoming's healthcare challenges. Currently, and in partnership with another Wyoming company, Secures.io and Continuum Loop, we have launched the Wyoming Resilient Aging and Digital Health Project. The Department of Health's state plan on aging outlines the state's growing financial responsibilities for elderly care. In 2017, Medicaid's cost for long-term care was $130 million a year, and those numbers are projected to increase to $186 to $312 million a year by 2030. In addition, Wyoming is the country's #1 dementia desert, as defined by the availability of neurologists per capita in the state. This is relevant because the lack of neurology care leads to earlier placement in long-term care facilities and increase the cost that the state must bear to care for our elderly. The Wyoming Resilient Aging and Digital Health Project addresses these cost concerns, as well as the safety of dementia patients in their home and resilience of their care providers, as well as improving the opportunity for Wyoming's elderly to better age in place. Now, informatics is the nervous system of healthcare. And informatics is a process of capturing signal and creating data, but then organizing that data into information. Once we have information, we still need to contextualize that information into knowledge and then utilize that information for performance. So blockchain will be an integral organizational component to managing healthcare informatics in the future. And this is why Wyoming Health Innovation Living Laboratory is working with Secures and Continuum Loop. We will be sending you a follow-up package on this project, as well as ideas of how you may help us advance digital healthcare to the citizens of Wyoming. But to address your legislative work and regarding blockchain, digital innovation as it applies to healthcare and the digital identification protection, I'd like to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Daryl O'Donnell.
Thanks, Alan. I'll call on you just in a little bit to describe the project in a little bit more detail. But my name is Daryl O'Donnell. I'm the founder of Continuum Loop. I'm based up in Canada, but I've been advising Secures and working with Dr. Gee on this project to try to cover off, as Dr. Gee indicated, information as it flows. If it's like a nervous system, we kind of got a broken nervous system. Everything is kind of a little bit messed up. And I'm going to run an analogy because I come out of a background of producing projects, typically life critical for military, whether that be search and rescue, that being aeronautical, maritime, combat search and rescue, presidential alerting systems, the similar systems up here in Canada, working with DHS, DOD, Army, Air Force, and various different other groups. What's really interesting, and I bring up the military and paramilitary types of groups that we work with, because they understand that interoperability and standardization, how do you move information in a way that I can predict and understand, makes it flow in far better. It's at higher quality and a higher rate, which gives Alan, Dr. Gee, lots more information on how do we solve stuff. One of the problems we have is how do you frame things and how do you bring in the geeks? That's me. That's part of the Secures team. But also, how do you bring in the appropriate governance? In order to bring in the right governance so that in a government context, as well as the business context, we know what's going on, we need to be able to bring some technology to bear, but you need to have the laws, those regulations, legislation in place so that we can actually get stuff done. And the project we're looking at right now is about dementia, helping in wayfinding. Dr. Gee will define it a little bit better. But I wanted to talk to you about that interoperability and standardization, because I've worked in multiple environments, whether that be NATO, whether that be Canada, US, whether that be deep inside the US, ranging from typical US Army operations to special forces. What I can tell you right now is without these standards and interop, we can't even operate inside the same service, let alone the same country, let alone sharing information with another country. But if we start doing this stuff in healthcare, we can do the same thing as the military does, where you have two countries that share radios, highly secure, and things just work. One of the missing pieces, most of the places around the world, are these fundamental building blocks. What's really interesting about what Wyoming has done is you have done this blockchain leadership work. You have already done things like put keys in the hand of shareholders, supporting the concept of DAOs. And even today, working through how do I do about digital impersonation? Because you've already handled the corporate and personal digital identities. Without those foundational blocks, the technology we'll build won't work nearly as well. The world's looking for groups like Wyoming to basically help show us how to do things. We think that what you have laid down foundationally, we can use Wyoming as a not just a test bed, but improve the overall outcomes, as Dr. Gee will explain in a second, in support of both healthcare, and especially when you get into the dementia cases, public safety. Because right now, one of our team members is he's a Canadian police officer, but he's quoted and known for saying that our inability to deal with privacy, because we're talking healthcare, our inability to deal with privacy has cost human lives because it limits the innovation. We have privacy respecting technology that's anchored back down to the legislation you have passed. We know that the project we work on will create new needs for amendments to the legislation, new legislation. That's one of the outputs. Dr. Gee, could you just give us a quick explanation of the project?
Yes, so the Wyoming Resilient Aging and Digital Health Project is a corollary to what was done in Ontario, Canada. Dementia patients, and we have an increasing number of dementia patients in the state of Wyoming. 70% of them will at some time will go wandering. They'll go walk about, they'll go drive about. I just had a patient the other day that did that. They found her somewhere between Gillette and Casper. So we were working with Garmin in Canada. We'll be working with Sony to have a wearable with a GPS, and we will be able to capture their location. If we do not find them, typically in the first 24 hours, 50% of those people that go wandering will die in environments like ours. So one aspect of the project is to be able to, with GPS, keep track of the dementia patients, keep them safe in their home so they can remain there longer. The other aspect, and being a care provider for dementia is the most stressful job in the world, bar none. It is ridiculously stressful. And so working with Molecular U, we were able to look at their profiles of resilience. We're looking at molecular profiling, genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, exposomics, gives us a pattern of their resilience and where we can help those care providers care for their loved ones in home, keep them safe, keep the care providers healthy. And so again, addressing in this particular project, those two elements of how we help with the individuals age resiliently in Wyoming.
Thanks, Alan. Another key aspect there about the aging population is that Wyoming does have a high number of veterans. Again, I was brought in for multiple reasons. One is I've been doing this interrupt work for now 20 plus years. Some of that comes in search and rescue. Dr. Gee just gave you some stats that 50% of people not found within 24 hours will perish. That's a sad fact that time is life in search and rescue. These systems we're talking about have both the protection, so they can't really be abused, meaning people can't track people they shouldn't be tracking. They can't act for people they shouldn't be acting for. But we get the information to do the best job we can of allowing these people, especially veterans, to age in place with both the grace and the dignity, as well, at the bottom line, as well as saving overall costs to families and to the state, because the cost of maintaining this as our population ages is quite insane. We believe that the project outputs will help us, as I mentioned earlier, drive of some amendments and or adjustments to the existing legislation so that we know that the proper protections are in place for those who have reached a state where they do need either guardianship. We also have global leaders in guardianship when it comes to digital identity on the team. And we look forward to providing that. Our real next steps are to, one, look for your support down the road, and we'll be providing you with a follow-up package, which provides a little more detail on exactly what we are doing, what we're hoping to work with Wyoming on, and we'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go on the record by saying Alan is one of my constituents. Most of the time, I have no idea what he's talking about because it's way beyond my pay grade, but I really appreciate the investment he's making in trying to combat aging in Wyoming.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think this discussion gets at the heart of something we'll talk about tomorrow when we kind of reflect on where we're at with the Digital Identity and the Privacy Act, and the idea that we need to create a structure that recognizes that data is not just a consumer thing. It's not just for dealing with consumers and products, but there are many different aspects of a digital identity that need to be contemplated. I think medical health and the provision of healthcare is a great example of that, where we want to make sure that we have appropriate digital identity, privacy and property rights and structure in place that are well suited, not just for consumer data, but for every aspect of that digital identity. So we look forward to working with you on this and making sure that the framework that we are building is an appropriate digital identity structure for the work that you're doing. So we'd appreciate that continued engagement, the feedback. Thanks for engaging with us, and we look forward to that continued work.
Absolutely. Will you be tuning into the stream tomorrow by chance?
I did not have that on my schedule, and I do have a patient schedule tomorrow, but I will do my best to participate and look forward to working with you all in the future. And thank you for all the work you're doing.
As
Awesome.
will I, Mr. Chairman.
Awesome. Well, thank you both.
Thank you.
All right. Nothing else from the committee? Again, thank you. Any more public comment? Who's that? Oh, sorry, Brandon. One bite at the apple tonight. Sir, welcome.
Test. Okay. Name's John Stokes, representative of Sky Dow LLC, based out of Wyoming. I'm gonna preface this a message from a friend, Craig Sellers, the founder of Tether, gave me a message to give y'all. I think it's important to discuss self-sovereign, open source, public blockchain and decentralized solutions like keychain.org, self and FIO, that's FIO, over centralized owned databases, giving the individual control over the information that is shared and or monetized, and provides with a level of anonymity. As currency becomes more digital, the features of actual cash need to be preserved, and this is only possible with open, decentralized solutions. So, with digital identity protections, impersonation isn't really what keeps me up at night. So like the idea that you could create like an incentive network to like capture people's digital identity keys and use that for like changing voting outcomes, or even like a Sybil attack on the registration process to create, fake digital identities. But we already have that vulnerability in the real world. There's vulnerabilities where people could create and age fake identities and use it for like insurance schemes or other things. And there's DEFCON talks about this. So as we like evolve this identity paradigm, we also need to look backwards on the vulnerabilities that are prevalent with our current identity systems and make sure we don't replicate that and make it even harder to prevent. So one of the digital identity solutions we're working on for our DAO governance structure is based off of a mathematical theorem, pseudonym pairs, where two people are randomly paired, and that generates the key. The way we prevent, those keys being contained by an attacker through like an incentive network is through having those keys recycled and have a registration event, maybe like once a month or once a quarter. And we've also been able to figure out that it'll take a collusion rate of over 33% to you have to have 33% attack on a network to create fake identities, which is greater than most other solutions. That I think the highest we've seen was like 12%. So yeah, I guess that's a lot to bear in mind when we think of digital identity protections moving forward. So.
Thank you, Mr. Stokes.
Yeah.
Any questions, committee? All right. Very helpful. We appreciate it. And thank you.
Thanks.
All right. With that, I will close public comment. And committee, what is your pleasure on this time, 22 LSO 0203? Moved by Senator Cost and seconded by Senator Furphy. Any amendments or discussion on the bill? Question this time, question on 22 LSO 0203. Yeah.
Senator Furphy.
Aye.
Senator Cost.
Aye.
Senator Nethercott.
Excused.
Representative Stith.
Aye.
Representative Western. Representative Yin.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Rothfuss.
Aye.
Chairman Olson.
Aye.
That passes.
I noticed Representative Ian changed his vote that time. All right. David and Mr. Co-Chairman, I guess my preference would be that at the end of tomorrow, we could go through all of our directives collectively. I would just entertain to you, David, the option right now. I suppose if there's something that is burning that you want to clarify with us, today before it leaves your mind or our minds? Otherwise, can we just go through it all tomorrow? As I'm sure you're very tired and we need you energized for tomorrow, all of you. Okay,
Especially.
all right. Awesome. Committee, if nothing further, I will, we'll recess until tomorrow. 7:30 a.m.
Yeah, I believe it's, Mr. Chairman, I believe it's 8:30,
Oh,
if I'm not mistaken.
8:30
They will have a call to order tomorrow, right here in Laramie, Wyoming.
All right. We'll see you there, folks. Thanks.